I have never shared a story with anyone before, in the hopes that you all get a glimpse of what actually goes on in the res from someone who actually went and experienced something. But I'll cut to the chase. I got to be part of a Navajo ceremony not long ago. It was for a book that me and some friends were working on. In the end, it ended up being one of the most meaningful events of my life, and I feel very blessed to have been able to experience it. There's just one small problem. The people I work with aren't big believers in the sort of thing, and I don't really have friends outside of work, and I don't really have family. I mean, I do, but that's actually a long story. Basically, I have nobody to talk to about my experience, but maybe you'll be kind enough to listen while I ramble a bit. Or maybe you won't, and that's fine too. Either way, it's always useful to put pen to paper, so let me start from the beginning. It was spring, a couple of years ago. Me and some friends are working on a short textbook for students containing interviews with Native Americans from different tribes. I happen to be the natural pick for the Navajo, since I recently completed a brief assignment there. On that assignment, I became friends with a guy that I'm gonna call Bill. Bill is actually young, but he's actually pretty close with the tribal leadership. He'll be an asset to me on this new project, so I reach out to him one morning. I'm wondering if he can get me in touch with some interesting tribal members. His response surprises me. "Hey, it's funny you call. Someone actually wants to meet you." Well, that's a happy coincidence. Bill says that there's this medicine man. I'll call him Jordan. Jordan randomly approached Bill a few days ago. He told Bill he was holding a special ceremony and asked Bill to ask me to attend. For context, I never even met this medicine man. In fact, I barely even know Bill, other than as a contact. So naturally, I'm asking, why would you want me? And Bill has no clue. "Hey man, he just told me to reach out to you." So I ask when the ceremony is being held, and he responds, "A couple of weeks from now." That's a lot sooner than I thought. At first, I thought I might not be able to make it, but keep in mind, I'm an academic. Publish or perish is the motto. Not only that, but Navajo medicine men are known for being private. A first-hand look at a Navajo ceremony with a real medicine man. Now that's a good opportunity. It could be a real highlight of the book. Who knows? Maybe it'll open doors for me. I'm picturing lectures and paid speaking engagements. I'm exaggerating a bit, but you get the picture. I want to contribute something good. So I tell Bill, I'll be there. Just tell me where I need to be. So Bill actually gives some very complicated directions. I jot them down. A week later, I'm barreling through the Navajo Nation in my old Jeep. Following Bill's directions, I turn off the main highway. From there, it's a long drive through the middle of nowhere. It'll be a couple of hours before I get anywhere near where the ceremony is going to be held. The Jeep bounces along, kicking up dust the whole way. In the meantime, I'm trying to read these confusing directions based on the geographical landmarks. I'm reading them as I'm driving, but also keeping my eyes peeled. I'm looking for a hogan. And in case you didn't know, these things can blend into the desert real easy. I will attach a picture so that you all can see. I don't want to miss it, but before I know it, daylight is beginning to disappear. Now I'm getting worried. This is actually taking more than a couple of hours. I'm starting to think maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere. I'm secretly cursing Bill and his awful directions. So the sun is beginning to set. I just about resigned myself to a night of sleeping in my Jeep when I see it off in the distance to my left. It's a hogan for sure. I make a beeline towards it by the last light of day. My Jeep rolls to a stop. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the desert goes dark. I breathe a sigh of relief. Later on, I note that this is the first moment when I felt that something wasn't quite right. I'm relieved to find the hogan, of course, but in my stomach, I feel butterflies, and not the good kind. So I do something weird. I sit there. I don't get out. I don't even move. After all of the rush of getting my bags packed, emailing my department about the trip, getting some of my responsibilities covered by other people, and hauling gas through the middle of nowhere, I'm actually debating about going inside. Why am I hesitating? After some time, the academic side of me wins. Snap out of it, kiddo. You got some work to do. I chalk up my hesitation to excitement jitters. I step out of the Jeep and it finally hits me. I'm about to be a witness to a special Navajo ceremony. I find myself wondering the same thing I asked Bill when he first called me. Why was I even invited here? I pause in the darkness, staring at the little mound of a building that I'm about to enter. Before I do, a scene plays out in my mind. I enter the hogan, and an open fire burns in the center. Around in a crowd of silent Navajo men sit in their rustic clothing. The medicine man is in a traditional Navajo garb. The flickering light casts its shadows on their faces. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. But anyways, by now, I know better than to expect these cliches. In fact, there's no open fire, no silence. Instead, I find the men talking cheerfully, wearing everyday clothes. A few of them have on cowboy hats. They're swapping stories and don't even acknowledge me when I come in. I sit down by the entrance. The women are mixing cornmeal and water. Then they grab palm-sized scoops out of the mix and roll them into balls into the center of the hogan, where I expected the open fire. But instead, there's a small oven with a big stone griddle on the stovetop. The women slap the cornmeal balls flat onto the hot stone. They sizzle. The aroma is amazing. I'm reminded that I actually haven't ate in several hours. A woman offers me a bowl of steaming food, and then the grilled cornmeal cakes start coming off the griddle. One of the women hand me one, and I begin to stuff my face. As I begin to eat, one of the men says something. It must be funny because all the others start to laugh. And then there's this one older man who lets out this big, booming laugh. And just like that, I'm back with my grandparents. So let me give you some background on my grandparents. My grandpa was a big bear of a man, enormous hands, big snow white beard like Santa Claus. Grandma, on the other hand, was a small southern woman, very outdoors. She had a garden that I helped her tend. In the summer, it was packed with cucumbers and tomatoes, and all kinds of other veggies. That grandma would turn everything into soup. She actually baked cornbread too, and it's still one of my favorite meals. As the aroma filled the kitchen, Grandpa would steal me away. He would take me under the sycamore and tell me stories. In a way, my grandpa was a very old world guy who knew a lot about spooky folklore. Most of the stories he told me involved trolls and elves. He used to tell me the story that I remember so much. As a boy, Grandpa and his friends would spend hours in the woods back in his hometown, not in the US. One day, they found something in a clearing in the trees. This specific area of the woods was not unfamiliar to them, but none of them had ever seen this clearing before. It was like someone just came in overnight and cut down a circle of trees in the middle of the forest. Only the clearing was totally flat and grassy like nothing had ever grown there. And in the center stood these very big stones, taller than any of the boys. There were 6 stones total, covered in moss. Grandpa and his friends went up to touch them. They noticed that the stones had big ugly faces carved into them. They had noses, a mouth, eyes, and ears. One of the boys said that they are trolls. This idea scared them, and they all took off running for home, scared, but laughing. The next day they teased each other about being scared of the stones. They decided to go back, but they could never find a clearing again. They looked around for months without luck. Eventually, they just gave up. Grandpa would end the story by pointing to the woods surrounding the house, and he would say, "Those trolls are still out there somewhere." Then he tells me that the trolls always turn to stone in the light of the sun, but at night, the spell was lifted. The trolls would wake up in the moonlight, stretch their limbs, and shamble down the mountains. They moved quietly through the towns, and if you ran into one, best of luck. That troll had found its meal for the night. These stories spooked me pretty good when I was a kid. Grandpa knew this, so he would always finish by reassuring me, in the middle of the day, the trolls are asleep. There's no need to worry. Besides, I'm here to keep you safe. I always felt safer when he was around. He told me tons of other stories like this, always from his life back home, and most of them involved magic. And being a little curious kid, I wanted to know if magic was actually real. So one time I asked him. Keep in mind, my grandpa had a funny way of putting things. I can't remember the exact words that he used, but I do remember the essence of what he said. So I asked him, is magic real? And he says, magic actually works backwards. You have to believe in it before it becomes real. Obviously that confused me, so instead, I asked him if he believed in magic. You know how some people forget their dreams when they wake up, and then they claim that they don't dream, but they do. They just forgot. What the heck? Now I'm even more confused. So I would pester him about it all the time. Do you believe in magic, Grandpa? Yes or no? People who don't believe in magic are like sleepers who don't dream. It was always something like that. Nowadays, I find those responses kind of funny and kind of beautiful in a way, but at that time, I wasn't sure what the hell he was talking about. So the days would pass like this. Grandpa would tell me stories for hours. Then Grandma would come outside. She would bring iced tea bowls of soup, a plate pile high with cornbread. We would sit together under a sycamore and hold hands. Grandpa would say grace, then we would eat right there on the ground. Grandma would pile extra pieces of cornbread onto my plate as I ate. She tells me all about how well the garden grew that year compared to other years. Grandpa would make jokes. His huge laugh would ring through the air. And this is how I spent the best days of me being a kid. They were my family. They were my home. My memories of those days are still vivid in my mind after all this time. But the year I turned 13, Grandma got sick. She was in the hospital for weeks before she passed. Grandpa took it hard. It almost seemed like her dying drove him a little crazy. He started forgetting things. His stories became less exciting, and they all ended very sad now. He would barely even laugh, and not long afterwards, he passed away too. So I went to live with my dad, and to be honest, he's not important. The only thing you need to know about him is that he wasn't really around for much of me being a kid. Even after I moved in with him, he was never home. The house was always empty. It was just me and the internet. And fuck, I miss my grandparents badly. I fucking miss the garden, and the stories, and the laughing. I didn't feel at home where I was. My dad wasn't much of a role model either, but I won't go into that. So I made a choice. I didn't want to live there anymore. I didn't want to end up like my dad. Somehow, I would move away and never come back. So I put my head down and focused on school. I got a job at 15 and began saving up my money. Eventually, I graduated. My grades were very high, and I made it into the university. My home life made me qualify for financial aid, as well as tons of other grants. It helped me get started on my road in academia. I used my savings to buy a Jeep that some old dude was selling on the cheap. And then when the next semester rolled around, I was going off to college. The house was empty as always. My dad wasn't there to see me off, and to be honest, I wasn't surprised. But still, it did hit me kinda hard. I was losing my second home now. My first home, my real one, I lost when my grandparents died. Now, I was turning my back on my dad and this empty house. The future was wide open, but I was scared. But I still hit the road. I didn't know where home was at, but I know it wasn't here. And I'm sorry, I'm writing this in between a few things. I guess I'm getting sidetracked. But now that I think about it, this is the first time I really gotten a chance to think about these things. So I guess my mind is all over the place. But anyways, let me get back to it. So somehow, all of that led me to this place in the middle of the desert, inside a hogan, full of people I never met, eating their food and about to witness a ceremony that many outsiders never even get to see. People are laughing, and I'm shoving cornmeal cakes into my mouth. My butt is planted on the dusty floor. It's just like when I was a kid. But then, something happens. Remember those butterflies I felt in my stomach when I first showed up? They're back. Except that now, they're pissed off. At first I'm like, fuck, I must be eating too fast. My stomach feels pinched. I slow my chewing, but I think it's too late. Before long, it feels like a dozen snakes are wrestling inside my guts as I try to keep it together. That's when I noticed him. A slim man, across the hogan from me. Without taking his eyes off of me, he slips a chunk of wood into the belly of the oven. He gives me a curious look, then he lowers his gaze and stares into the fire. Bill never described him to me, but somehow, I know this must be Jordan. He's actually very young, and he's wearing a beat-up ball cap. Not what you would expect from a medicine man at all. A woman takes my empty bowl of food. Jordan pulls out a small box and opens it. The hogan goes silent. Jordan pulls 2 small bundles from out of the box, one for protection and one for blessings. He later told me the following, but I'll tell you right now. It turns out that Jordan is here to help out a man named Leonard, and I'll call him Leo for short. Leo has been having terrible nightmares. They started just a couple of months ago, and these nightmares are always the same. Leo finds himself in some isolated area. He comes upon a campfire, and the flames burn black like charcoal. Leo says that the fire gives off an eerie glow. The sight of it always strikes fear into Leo. He wakes up from these nightmares covered in sweat. He says it's always the same. His dreams of the black fire, and then when he wakes up, there's a strange smell in the room. Pungent, but not unpleasant. Leo can't identify it. Sometimes he's up for an hour or so, unable to fall back asleep. During these times, the smell doesn't go away. Leo passes out, and when he wakes up in the morning, the pungent smell is gone. At this point, Leo's mother chimes in. She says that her son began to change when the dream started. He's always been a quiet, serious young man, but he's become paranoid and violent, and he's always angry. He's not the same person he used to be. It's like the dreams are changing him. She says that not long ago, she actually wanted to pay her son a visit. She walked as she normally does, and as she got closer, she could see from a distance that someone was outside of Leo's home. She said that this person seemed to be peering into the house through the front window. It was kind of late and somewhat dark outside. She said she couldn't tell who the stranger was, but she thought it was a friend that was going to check on her son. But then, as she got closer, and this is when she stopped talking, and I could see that there are tears in this old woman's eyes as she was trying to speak. And then she looked around and looked at me. There's a long silence, and then Leo says that he saw it from inside the house as well. But this is the weird thing, that none of them seem to want to say what it was. But at the same time, I'm looking around, and everybody in the hogan seems to understand. It's almost like they know what's being discussed without anybody actually saying it. I look at Jordan for answers, but he doesn't speak. He just stares into the fire that burns in the oven. After a long silence, he does something unexpected. He begins to sing. It's out of nowhere, and I almost jumped in my seat. And as he sings, he pulls out this small pouch. He reaches in with his fingers and sprinkles some powder over the flames in the oven. I quickly know what it is. It's cedar. The aroma is pleasant, but I look over at Leo, and he reacts strangely. His body becomes tense. He seems dazed, with his jaw slack and his head tilting back. He almost looks like he's been knocked out cold, except that his lips are moving, which reminds me of my old roommate who used to mumble in his sleep. Jordan keeps singing, and the song is beautiful. Soon, despite Leo's weird trance, I'm pulled into Jordan's song. This next part is hard to describe. I'm not sure if maybe I went into a trance too, but as I was listening to Jordan singing, the sound of his voice seemed to quiet everything. I began to feel the music in my ears, then my chest. Then, it seemed to resonate throughout the wooden frame of the hogan itself. The only thing I can liken to it now is that feeling of being next to a speaker when it's blasting music. It wasn't exactly like that, but similar. At this point, it seems that Jordan's singing seemed to be literally all around me. It seemed to be coming out of the walls. I could almost see it like the hogan was moving itself. Like I said, it's hard to explain. It seemed to only last a few moments. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Jordan's voice grew quiet, and then he pulled out a pipe and began to stuff it with tobacco. He took a few, and then with one last big puff, blew a huge cloud, and pulled out the smoke with his fingers, hanging himself all over with it. And then he took one last puff, and this time he blew the smoke all over Leo. And as he did this, Leo seemed to come out of his trance. His eyes were wild, like he had just woken up from a terrible dream. The pipe went around the room, and everyone followed Jordan's example. When the pipe came to me, I blew a cloud of smoke and patted myself all over with it, similar to the way that Jordan did. As I did this, I heard a knock at the small door of the hogan. Everybody went silent. Something was skittering around outside. I naturally thought this was an animal that was trying to get in, but there were more knocks, and they were coming from different sides of the hogan. Jordan then put his hand on Leo's head and started to pray. I then began to feel strange. For the record, I did dabble in drugs while in college, but never to a significant degree. My classmates all smoked pot. A few others took shrooms, but I never wanted to mess with that stuff, because to be honest, my dad was a fuck up, and I was worried about becoming like him. With that said, during a deep period of depression, I smoked pot twice, and I took shrooms once, but I never messed with alcohol, so I'm very familiar with the sensations, both positive and negative. I'm familiar with the off feeling of a bad trip, and to be honest, for a moment, I did wonder if Jordan just had to smoke something, but what I felt was not like that. It didn't feel like a high or a chemical sensation. It didn't feel like a bad trip either, even though I was beginning to feel scared. It was something else, something familiar, something I hadn't felt in a long time. At that point, the butterflies returned, and they hit me like a truck. My stomach was starting to jump all over the place. I once heard someone describe their food poisoning experience as their stomach feeling like a sack full of cats. That's what this felt like. I felt very ill. I tried to get a grip. I tried to tense up my stomach and get the sensation under control, but I could tell I was about to throw up. I was breaking out into a bad sweat, and nobody seemed to notice. Nobody, except Jordan. I found myself staring into his eyes. After the ceremony, Jordan would explain it all to me. However, the ceremonial smudge is different. How people react well to the tobacco, and that's a good thing. But when it doesn't sit well with people, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means that the spirits are working on them in an uncomfortable but necessary way. The medicine man pays attention to these things. He watches carefully, then he picks out the appropriate prayers based on what he sees. Jordan also tells me that on most occasions, everyone in the ceremony reacts the same way to the tobacco. Either the smudge goes well and everyone feels peaceful, or else the smudge makes everyone feel sick. It's one or the other. But what is strange is for the smoke to single out one person. If it was gonna be anybody, it should have been Leo. The ceremony was for him after all. And that's when Jordan began to suspect that he had been right to invite me. He explains all this to me later in private, but in that moment, I'm clueless. All I'm thinking is I'm gonna shit my pants, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm practically belly dancing in my seat at this point. The others are starting to notice, and the knocking at the hogan has started to match the feeling in my stomach. It's gotten violent. Then Jordan lets out a piercing scream, and it all goes away. The sound of his voice settles my stomach. It's like it shoots through me, pulls out the board of snakes wrestling in my stomach. I have no other words for it. It's like someone unclogged the drain. I let out a huge sigh. I have sweat dripping down my face, my chest, and my back. The others are looking at me now. They must be wondering what the hell Jordan was thinking by inviting this non-native man into their bed. Leo is still in his own world, oblivious to me or the pounding on the walls. He's rocking back and forth. Jordan looks concerned. He passes something else around the room. It's a small bag or pouch. Each person pulls something out of it and then passes it to the next person. When it comes to me, I reach in and find that it's full of arrowheads. For the first time, someone speaks to me. The woman to my left leans over and whispers, "Don't let it touch the ground." I notice that she's eyeing me with concern. I must look like a mess. I pass the pouch to the next person, clutching my arrowhead. I'm not gonna let it touch the ground. Jordan is back to singing. His voice still seems to resonate in the walls. But to be honest, I don't know if I'm just being delirious. But there's definitely somebody or something outside. There are heavy footsteps moving around the hogan, and whatever it is, it's big. Jordan throws more cedar on the flames. Its aroma fills the space again. I inhale it. It feels good. I breathe in through my mouth to taste it. Weird, I know, but it made sense to me at that time. As I'm swallowing the cedar, I feel my throat begin to feel funny, kind of prickly. Then it closes up. It's a feeling I know very well. Jordan keeps adding cedar to the fire, and for the first time, I see some urgency in his movements. Now, he keeps glancing up as the knocking on the hogan moves from one side to the other. Another pouch goes around the room. Everyone else seems nervous. They're dipping their fingers into the pouch and streaking what looks like a white powder over their faces like war paint. Meanwhile, the tightness in my throat has given way to a rising lump. This is what the butterflies were warning me about. Jordan's voice is basically thundering at this point. He then holds up his arrowhead as the knocking on the walls grows louder. I can see that Leo's eyes are open, but nobody's home. Jordan then makes a gesture in the air with his arrowhead. Instantly, Leo lets out a huge sigh. He almost falls over like a deflated balloon. He wobbles for a bit. Then he looks around the room at us. His eyes are back to normal now. Meanwhile, the lump in my throat is about to burst. There's a sudden pounding on the hogan door. For the first time, I hear Jordan's voice start to crack. He glances over at me. I'm sitting in front of the entrance. The door is right behind me. I hear something that sounds like scraping or scratching. The wind outside is howling now. Maybe it's the strength of the wind, drowning everything out. But Jordan's voice is starting to sound weak. Then, something happens that sends the ceremony everywhere. There's another heavy pounding at the door. The wind picks up. There's a pop. And just like that, the door is thrown open by the wind. It slams open and shut in the blast. At that moment, the lump in my throat breaks, and tears flood my eyes. The women begin to scream. The men are shouting. The gust circles through the hogan. The fire starts to struggle, and Jordan's voice is barely even heard now, but his eyes continue fixed on me. He raises his voice and continues to sing, and the whole time I'm just crying. It's like years of sadness are pouring out of me. I'm crying like a baby, thinking about my dad, about the empty house with nobody in it but me. I think about my grandparents and how they left me when they died. They were my home. In the midst of the chaos, the wind is tearing through the hogan. All of these different thoughts are raging inside of me. And then, just like that, everything is calm. The wind seems to literally sink into the ground. It's gone. I feel someone lay a hand on my shoulder. It's a large, heavy hand. I don't dare turn around. I'm afraid of what I'll see. I keep looking at Jordan, whose song is now ringing through the air again. It fills the space and resonates in the walls. I can feel it all around me. The tears are still running down my face. I feel something that I haven't felt in a very long time. I feel like I'm with my grandpa again. It comes from out of nowhere, but it feels completely real. I know he's gone, but I have this distinct feeling that he's right there. That it's his hand on my shoulder. All the anger I felt about him dying and leaving me behind, it all goes away. And all I can think about is how sorry I am. I feel bad for blaming him, and I actually want him to know that. Jordan is still singing, and I blink, and I look around, and everyone is looking in my direction. They're looking over my shoulder. There's a long moment when I'm just watching all of them. Then, they all bow their heads. Everyone except Jordan, who keeps his eyes fixed on something behind me. The hogan is resonating with his song again. The song is beautiful, and it feels warm in my ears. The feeling I mentioned, the one I haven't felt in a long time, it's a sense of connection. I feel connected with everyone there. Even though I don't know anybody, I feel connected to my grandfather. I can feel his presence. He's in the room with me. I know it. I keep my eyes on Jordan, but I lift my hand up and reach back. I touch the hand resting on my shoulder. The hand is solid. It's real. And it's warm. Jordan throws a fistful of cedar into the fire, and I feel the hand grow warmer. Outside, it begins to rain. The flames of the fire are raging again, and Jordan's eyes are staring into mine. He's singing with a smile on his face. The hogan feels like it's breathing all around me, and for the first time that night, I speak out loud. I tell my grandpa that I love him, and Jordan's song is filling my ears again, and in the song, I can hear a voice that sounds like my grandpa's voice. By the time Jordan finishes his song, my grandfather's hand is growing cold. Then it fades, and the hogan is quiet for the first time since I arrived. The ceremony comes to an end sometime in the early morning hours. By the time that everyone leaves, the sun is rising. Despite the hell of a night I just had, I don't lose sight of my duties. I still need that interview for the book. Jordan is actually wide awake, so I interview him just outside the hogan. It's during this interview that he talks about the smudge and explains the purpose of the arrowheads and the face paint. But the question that was really burning in my mind was the one that had been there since I talked with Bill. Why was I invited? A non-native man and a total stranger. So Jordan told me when Leo's mother approached them about holding a special ceremony for her son, Jordan agreed to do the ceremony. He did what he always did. He prayed for guidance, and that night, he had a dream. In the dream, a creature was prowling around the hogan. Jordan was sitting inside, and a white man he had never met confronted the creature. When Jordan woke up, he wondered what this dream meant, so he prayed. Long story short, Jordan learned that the creature was the evil spirit that was afflicting Leo, and that it actually wasn't native. He said it was brought over by a non-native for some reason that he didn't make clear. Jordan knew that he needed to call upon non-native spirits to help him manage this thing, whatever it was, and without it, the ceremony would fail. From his prayers, Jordan understood that Bill was somehow connected to the white man from his dream. He also knew that I would be calling Bill, so he told Bill to invite me. When I showed up, Jordan thought that he had made a mistake. I wasn't the white man from his dream. but it was too late to do anything about it, and he carried out the ceremony as planned. When the evil spirit forced its way into the hogan, that violent wind that blew the door open, Jordan believed it was going to kill him, but then he saw that something was protecting me, though he couldn't see what it was at first, but he knew it was a spirit of some sort. Jordan then interrupted himself and asked if I knew what these ceremonies were called. I told him I wasn't sure, and he said, "We call these ceremonies sings, because the singing is crucial." He told me that songs are like food for the spirits. The same way that a good meal can comfort you or make you happy, the right song can give certain helpful spirits and make them stronger. Jordan felt the evil enter the hogan, trying to put out the fire, and if the fire had gone out, it would have been all over. But Jordan was focused on me and on my protector, and he sang a song to give his strength. He was at that point that he knew for sure that I was the person he had meant to invite, because as he sang, the spirit behind me took the shape of a man. It was the man from Jordan's dream. It was my grandpa. As soon as he appeared, the evil spirit fled. I asked Jordan why this was, and he shrugged. That was for the great spirit to know. But in his own experience, only good spirits that have intimate knowledge of bad spirits can chase them away. Maybe your grandfather encountered the spirit while he was alive, Jordan suggested. Then Jordan pointed out something else. The Great Spirit had used him to heal not just one person that night. First it was Leo, and then me. He told me that he noticed I had reacted badly to the smudge. That only happened because there was a deep cut inside of me that had never healed. My grandpa's spirit was there. When I smudged myself, I had allowed my grandpa to begin healing the wound. Later, after the evil spirit had fled, Jordan had stepped in and finished what my grandpa started. He closed all the wounds. I will forever be grateful to Jordan. There's more to the story, but I think I said everything I needed to say. I lost my family and my home when I was a kid. In a way, I lost myself after that. I grew bitter. I stopped dreaming, and I lost my faith. So I know I said this in the beginning that I wanted to make a few things clear about what goes on in the res, but I also wanted to share this story for those who have lost their faith. Anyways, I want to extend my love and gratitude to everyone that is listening to my story. I'll always be grateful for that. My friend and I were at a party on the Hopi reservation in Polaca. It was getting late, and we had a pretty good buzz on. Most of the people we knew had already trickled out, so we decided it was a good time as any to leave. We looked around for the friend who was supposed to give us a ride, because we had all come together. We found him in a back bedroom, drunk and passed out. So we had no choice. We're gonna have to walk. The two of us lived on the other side of the gulch. A good 2 miles. Between were nothing but trees, scrubs, bushes, and some hills. We had barely cleared the houses onto the road passing between the wooded area when we got this funny feeling we were being watched. We decided to leave the road and cut through the trees. It wasn't the easiest walk, but it would cut the distance down some. And even though it was pitch black outside, we knew the way pretty well. We had been a good 20 minutes off the road and heading up towards the hills when that same feeling of being watched came upon us again. We both turned around at the same time, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything. But then, my friend Paul swore he heard some kind of cackling or mumbling. I didn't hear anything, except for maybe the wind in the top of the trees at our back. By that time, none of us was gonna admit it. We were feeling a little scared. Without saying a single word, we picked up the pace
moving along pretty good but not running. And that's when I heard it too. But now, it was more like heavy breathing. Paul then grabbed my arm and gave me a tug forward. We took off running straight up the hill, which wasn't that big, but it was still enough of a slope so I wasn't feeling it in my legs. And on top of that, I was drunk. Think about this for a second. Running up a hill, at night, drunk, complete darkness, and as you're running, you hear footsteps behind you, and heavy breathing. Whatever it was though, stayed with us every step of the way. Right at the top, Paul and I stopped and turned around, expecting the thing to be right on us. But we were standing there, huffing and puffing, and looking at nothing but darkness. A few seconds passed, and then we heard a thin laughter, as if it was coming from down the hill and back from where we started running. We decided to keep moving and put some distance between us. We turned to go down the other side of the hill, and there, standing right in front of us, was this creature. It was standing up on two legs, like a circus dog, only much taller, with both paws extended out in front of it. It had this coyote face, and it was grinning at us, all of its teeth exposed, and its tongue sliding from one side to the other. I couldn't believe how skinny it was, as if it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its rounded stomach sticking out like one of those African kids in the charity ads, and the skin sinking between its ribs. The smell was unbelievably bad, like the smell of an old, wet dog. We both jumped back with a scream, like two little schoolgirls. As we did, the creature dropped down on all fours and ran past us and down the hill back where we had come from. It was yipping and laughing all the way. Paul and I started praying like never before, swearing to Jesus that if he got us home safe, we would never drink again. The laughing, or whatever you want to call it, died down and disappeared. Wasting no time, the two of us made our way down that hill and into the trees that separated us from where we lived. As we walked along, we were trying to convince each other everything was okay. It was only a coyote, out searching for a meal. We scared it jumped up at us, and then it ran away. We started feeling better about things overall. We got across the open field and into the trees. We made it all the way through there, without anything else happening. However, just as we stepped out towards that first backyard that we needed to cut through to get to the street, we heard this unmistakable chatter, like some little monkey laughing, coming out of the trees just behind us. It was followed by the sound of something moving through the branches and twigs. My friend Paul then yelled out some words that he said that his grandmother had taught him, and just like that, the noise ceased and it got real quiet. He then grabbed my arm again and we ran. We ran as fast as we could through that yard and out to the road. We ran straight for the house where Paul lives with his grandmother. When we got there, we found her awake and sitting in the kitchen with only a small candle for light. She was burning some cedar. When she saw us, she put her finger up to her lips and then pointed to the outside of the house. Her lips were moving, but silently. We stood there still for a minute or two, and then she spoke out loud, saying it was okay. She then said a prayer, and that the skinwalker was now gone. I have no idea how she knew, and I didn't care. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night there, sleeping where I knew I would be safe. I'm gonna start off this story by explaining that it's not mine. I'm just the one who wrote it all down. I'm not Denye, the actual name of the Navajo. and this is how I'm going to refer to them from here on out. I have never lived on a reservation, and I know very little about their folklore. I was actually in between of believing all these paranormal things for a really long time, until something happened to me a few years ago that made me into a believer. Nothing to do with skinwalkers or things of that nature, but it definitely made me believe in ghosts. This story was told by my Denia friend Sam, and comes from his own experience. I met Sam on a photo gig a few years after graduating art school, and we connected through our shared interest in the paranormal. We would tell stories about our personal paranormal experiences. All names have been changed at Sam's request for privacy, and I'm using a different account. Sam also gave me permission to write this, and fully cooperated with me as I put this together. According to him, he's too lazy, and I have too much time on my hands, so he was fine with me putting this together for him. Sam is a full-blooded Denie. His mother and father grew up in the nation near New Mexico. They had Sam at a very young age, and broke up a few years after he was born. His mother moved back to Illinois with his now stepfather, who is white and Catholic. Sam grew up in Chicago suburb and lived the most of his childhood and teenage years there. He would visit his dad for a couple weeks a few times a year, but never really spent a huge amount of time out on the res. It was at 20 that Sam moved in with his dad on the reservation. He said to get a better understanding of his heritage, as he said it, and stayed there till he was about 24. He was very interested in his Denia heritage, especially when he started developing his art practice as a painter and photographer. As he spent more and more time on the res, he grew a deep interest in Denia superstition, I guess as a way to connect to his culture that he felt he didn't do enough to be a part of during his childhood and teenage years, since he was raised in Midwestern suburban white culture because of his mother and stepdad. While on the res, he made friends with and eventually dated a girl that we're gonna call Jess, who had fully grown up on the res. She was a little older than Sam and got her teaching degree in another state before coming back to the res to teach high school. She was basically agnostic, but had a very superstitious family. In fact, her great uncle, who we're gonna call John, was a medicine man. I'm not really familiar with the details surrounding this practice, and Sam also didn't talk too much about this, but basically, he was a very respected elder and was extremely superstitious. He often spoke of Denia folklore, creatures, magic, etc., and took it all very serious. John was pretty old and often needed help around his property, so Sam was quite often over there helping him out with odd jobs. Sam felt weird taking money from the old man, especially since Sam already had a part-time job as an art teacher and sold his paintings and photos in Santa Fe art markets. So as payment, Sam would ask John to share some of his knowledge with him. It was Sam's way of connecting to his heritage. He told me that they would talk for an hour or two every night that Sam came over to help. Sam would basically grill him on every random, Denia-related thing under the sun, and would generally get an earful about it, except when it came to one specific topic, yenaglooshi. Sam, having spent most of his childhood with his mom and stepdad off the res, didn't have the same outlook on skinwalkers that other Denia did. The whole thing about not speaking about them wasn't something he subscribed to, mainly because A, Sam grew up in the Chicago area where no skinwalkers would be around anyways, and B, he was raised Catholic and didn't believe in Denia superstitions. He was pretty interested in this part of Denia culture because of how common skinwalkers were on the internet. So naturally, his interest in them disturbed John, and he generally shut down any discussion of them. She got visibly upset and told him to never speak of them to her or her great uncle ever again. This was really weird to Sam, since Jess wasn't superstitious or even religious for that matter. He thought that his agnostic girlfriend wouldn't be so weird about these things. She explained to Sam that, despite her being agnostic, that was one thing she knew was real, because she and other members of her family had experiences. She told him a very similar story to the types you'll see posted online. Late at night on the res, driving home, and seeing what you think is a coyote or a sheep following you at a great speed, only upon closer inspection, see what appears to be human underneath animal skin, or a half man, half coyote kind of creature. This happened to Jess when she was a little girl. While being driven home by her father, Great Uncle John came and performed some sort of protection cleansing ritual that they thought would cover them, at least for a few years. It wasn't until Jess moved back after getting her degree did she encounter one again, this time running along the rooftops of some homes and buildings in town. She thought somehow someone's dog got up on their roof, but it would then get on two legs and jump to the next building. After landing, it would stay up there, sitting cross-legged, staring at her with yellow eyes. She ended up speeding home so fast that she got pulled over by the tribal police. When she explained what she saw and why she was speeding, the officer told her to be quiet, tore up the ticket he was writing, and told her to get her ass home. Uncle John came by again and performed the ritual. Jess said that according to John, the creature wasn't after her and was caught in the act of stalking someone else. That made it set its eyes upon her, so she was to be extra cautious. And this is why she stands firm by the words of, "Shut the fuck up about them forever." She only told Sam all of this to keep the things off her and her family. But wouldn't you know it, that just made him more interested. And who could blame him? It seems as though Sam kind of whittled down John's resolve on the issue, because eventually, the old man budged a little bit. He revealed to Sam a few bits and pieces of information over the years. I'm just going to copy and paste from some Instagram messages he sent me. Please note that the only changes I made to his messages were the names of those involved. Also, in case it isn't obvious, Sam likes to abbreviate Skinwalker to SW. The first thing John told me about Skinwalkers was that they can't actually read minds like they say in the stories and stuff. It was basically what you'll call an old wives' tale, because they didn't want their kids talking about that shit and spreading the idea that this was something people could do. I actually think they wanted the practice of being skinwalkers to die out completely, so they thought by forbidding people from talking about it, nobody would be curious enough to try out black magic and shit. I think because Denya are so steeped in oral traditions that they basically believed if enough people stop talking about a thing, it dies forever. But you know real well that you can't tell people not to talk about something. So they said that if you talk about skinwalkers, it will make them interested in you and seek you out. It was just them trying to scare kids. The other thing is that they are just regular people, not monsters. They don't have any special powers. They just know a lot about certain things that a lot of us don't. Like how there are things you know how to do as a video guy, for example, that regular people who never done it don't. Like when you show them a really cool edit you did or shots you pulled off, and they're like, how did you do that? It's the same kind of stuff. They just spend a lot of time learning about stuff that makes them able to do what they do. They studied animals and how they move, making suits, studied poisons, shit like that. They're actually medicine men just like John. In fact, a lot of them are openly good medicine men in the community, and nobody knows they practice this stuff. It's just another form of their medicine man stuff, but they use it for people who want to harm or scare others, like they get hired to fuck with people. John told me this one story about a close friend who was also a medicine man in the city area that had an asshole in the neighborhood who kept bitching about his property lines or something like that. He was building a fence and there was a big fuss about it. The guy was harassing the shit out of his next door neighbor because of it, but the neighbor knew where his land started and ended, so he didn't budge. Eventually, some weird shit started to go down. The asshole's neighbor was talking about how there was a giant coyote in his backyard that would look in the windows at night and scare the fuck out of him and his girlfriend. He would hang in his backyard with a shotgun around sundown, which of course would weird out everyone in the neighborhood, and a lot of folks were saying that he was mentally unstable. But then people in the neighborhood started hearing fucked up noises, and someone saw a coyote stand on its hind legs and look in the windows. Then one day, the guy's girlfriend drove him back to the emergency room because he was having a really bad trip apparently, hallucinating and talking about this coyote man who was saying that he was gonna kill him. John doesn't know what he was on, if it was some kind of drug or something. He came down a few hours later, and a lot of people in town laughed it off. But John's friend and a few other people in the neighborhood, like I assume the ones who actually saw the coyote man, knew that it was most likely a skinwalker fucking with him. John said that skinwalkers know a lot about medicine, how to get the results they want from them, and how to administer them to victims without them knowing. Like they know so much about the compounds and shit, that they know exactly how it will affect you and how to fuck with you when you're on them. So John's friend came by to bless the place and perform a ritual, and the weird shit stopped. Because skinwalkers are medicine men themselves, they also believe in the power of the rituals that are used against them. That's how I would say these things work. Nothing super magical or paranormal about it. They just have strong beliefs and know what to fuck with and what not to. Anywho, so he thinks that this asshole neighbor got a skinwalker on him to get him to move out of town or something like that. The last thing John told me for a really long time was about how skinwalkers were actually good guys at one time. They created that whole practice to fuck with the colonizers. They protected other people and scared away anybody trying to take the land. But some started using the practice for their own gain, and once the treaties were signed and we got land back and all that, they just started using it to do bad stuff to other Dinya. After this, John basically closed the door on the skinwalker talk. Sam told me he thought it was weird that John didn't want to talk about them. After all, John said it himself that skinwalkers can't read minds, and talking about them didn't draw their attention to you. As Sam said, it's an old wives' tale. He even told this to Jess, but she shot him down. She actually kind of insulted him apparently, telling Sam that he's not a real Dinya, so he doesn't understand, and him trying to get into this deep skinwalker stuff was actually offensive to their heritage. And that's part 1. I will be posting the second part soon, which will begin to cover some more elements of skinwalker lore that I thought was a lot more interesting than what John initially led on. I realized that the last post presented a grounded, realistic idea of the skinwalker, but this is where we start getting into some real supernatural shit, and because of that, I do want to say everything with a disclaimer that what I'm about to tell you I cannot verify. I am not Dinya, and I know very few folks who are native, much less culturally native. I don't live anywhere near the Four Corners either. This is all from the recollection of one Dinya friend of mine, who is retelling stories and information given to him by a much older man. Believe what you can, or take everything with a grain of salt. I hope it's a fun read. I'm warning you, it's much longer this time around. After learning the truth about skinwalkers and being scolded by his girlfriend, Sam took the clue and for a while focused his time spent with John on things the old man actually wanted to talk about. Sam learned a lot about his culture and the practice of medicine man, and worked on this gorgeous 4x5 portrait series of elderly folks on the res. Sam told me that it was around this time that he realized he was pretty cautious in the way he approached the skinwalker subject. He was just a dumb kid raised in white America who thought he was being curious about his native culture, when actually he was spending more time chasing scary stories than actually learning about his people. By the time Sam had been living on the rest for about 4 or so years, he even got a full-time teaching job at one of the reservation schools. He moved out of his dad's place and got his own. Sam always had planned to move back to Illinois or to some bigger city with more of an art scene, but wanted to spend much more time on the res, at least another 5 years or so. Despite that desire to stay and his new job, he and Jess ended up moving to my city only a few months into his full-time position. And that's around the time that I actually met him. His usual response to why they both left was that he needed to be somewhere with a bigger art scene and community, and Jess wanted to go back to school to get an MSW. But it wasn't until I got to know him well, and we started bonding over our shared interest in the paranormal, did he actually tell me why they left. Here are the DMs that he sent me. John was getting up there in age, late 80s. The guy lived a long life, had some cancer in his 60s and beat it, but he would tell me that he always wondered when it would come back to take him. I think it was like in 2014 or something. As a side note, Sam moved to the res in 2010 and met John a few months after that. So he was diagnosed with lung cancer that spread to his liver, colon, and he was only given a few months to a year to live. Fucking sucked to hear because we were basically brothers by this point. For being as old as he was really sharp. After being diagnosed with cancer, Jess, her father, and Sam spent a lot more time with the old man helping him around the house. At this point in his life he was only in bed and had refused to be put in hospice care as he thought it was a waste of the family's money for, as Sam put it, a more comfortable way of dying. A few months in, Sam received a call from John asking him to come over that evening. And here's the message from Sam. He told me that he had some stuff he wanted to tell me that he didn't want to die with him. I assume he felt like he was on his way out based on that. I packed my recorder in case he was okay with me recording him. When Sam arrived, John was just sitting in his porch, watching the sunset. He beckoned Sam to sit next to him and told him that he had some last bits of knowledge to share with him. When Sam mentioned that he brought his camera with him, John allowed him to film, with his only request being that he wouldn't show it to anyone and that he would stop recording when he told him to. This is what Sam sent me. We spent like an hour or so just talking about whatever came to his mind. It was a lot of stuff like I told you before. Stuff like parts of the reservation that are cursed, pathways or portals to other dimensions, and then stuff like how to bless your home, what plants do what, how to find your way home if you're lost in the desert. Also some songs and prayers that I had to have on tape because it was in the language, and I'm actually trash at it. It was like he was trying to cover everything he felt like he hadn't told me before, as he never actually passed on his knowledge to one before. He said he was keeping some knowledge for himself, but he still wanted to share what he felt comfortable with. It was here that I asked Sam why John would tell his great-niece's boyfriend from Chicago all of this, if it's supposed to be secrets and stuff that stay within the Denia people. It's a little bit different than that. Like I did a lot for him, renovated his home, built him a patio, even helped him get internet, and gave him my old MacBook and showed him how to use it. I gave him my old Wii, and he became fucking obsessed with Wii Sports. Pretty sure he felt like he owed me because of everything I helped him with, and I always refused to take a single penny. I get why it seems weird, but also I feel like he didn't have anyone interested enough to just sit down and hear him talk for hours on end. So I guess he appreciated me for that or something. Or maybe he was actually just fucking with me, but I doubt it. He was pretty sharp in his old age, and also was a genuine guy. After the sun went down, John requested that they turn off the camera and go inside. Once inside, he told Sam to turn on the TV and raise the volume. He explained that it was important that no one hear their conversation. According to Sam, the old man didn't have any neighbors for miles, so he actually found that strange, at least until he learned what their conversation was about. "I haven't been honest with you about yenaglooshi," he said. He then requested that Sam burn some plants, herbs, mixtures of some sort that he had to put on top of the logs in his fireplace. This was so that, according to John, no one in this world or the other could hear them. It seems, and this is just Sam's reading of the situation, that John thought by writing skinwalkers off as just assholes who dress in animal skins and drug people with shrooms to fuck with them, he would discourage the young man from ever looking any further into the legends. And while that was definitely true, there were skinwalkers who had no powers, no connection with the supernatural, and were just Denya fanatics who played dress up. That was only part of the story. Yenaglooshi's exist in two different natures. The first kind, John had already explained to Sam. Medicine man with no actual supernatural powers, just a very extensive knowledge of various medicine compounds, able to craft very convincing outfits of animal pelts, and can move and behave very similar to whatever animal they wish to mimic. These folks were accessible to the general population on the res. When I say accessible, of course, I don't mean just anyone can seek them out. It takes someone well connected. These skinwalkers would often receive monetary compensation for their deeds. They based this entire practice on the legends of the shapeshifters and dark witches in Denya folklore. This explains a good portion of skinwalker stories and lore that you see posted online. Large coyotes or sheep behaving strange, only to, upon closer inspection, reveal that they are a person wearing animal skins. But what about the other stories? The stories of these creatures, half man, half beast, pulling off unnatural speeds around the res, running alongside cars at top speed, mimicking voices, reading and even controlling minds, immune to firearms, shapeshifting into incredibly convincing, terrifying wolf-like creatures, glowing red or yellow eyes, and faces that are not human or animal. Well, you guessed it, those are the real yenaglooshis. Powerful, dark witches who have scared the Denya and sometimes others for centuries. John said that skinwalkers developed around the time when the first colonizers arrived. Medicine man and the tribes were incredibly cautious of these visitors, and as time went on, they revealed themselves to be conquerors. The medicine man, as Sam put it, turned to the dark side. In order to scare them off, medicine men back then knew that by turning to the practice of black magic, there wasn't really any turning back. Black magic robs them of humanity and corrupts their souls, but they believed that they could do this for the good of their people, and then, once the colonizers were driven out, be dealt with by their own people. In fact, some medicine men revealed their plans for this to other members of their practice, who opted not to participate in the rituals. They gave them detailed instructions on how to protect themselves, and even kill them when necessary. Unfortunately, we know how this turned out, and now we have the unique Denya problem of the skinwalkers. And unlike the other skinwalkers, the pretenders in animal fur, these yenaglooshis are not human, or at least not in the sense that is recognized by the Denya. In order to become one of these things, they must participate in a ceremony that essentially robs them of their humanity, and after a long enough time living as one of them, they barely even resemble a human in appearance. Think of the Wendigo, a creature that was once human, but through some horrific, twisted process or ritual, became something else. The practice of being a skinwalker is guarded, even more so than that of the pretenders. It requires committing horrible acts, murder, or torture of a family member or friend, ingesting poisons and human flesh, and communicating with entities from other dimensions. Skinwalkers are also a people unto themselves, an isolated subculture of the Diné that branched off a long time ago. Even though they make their home in the same region as the Diné, they generally do not live among them. They are a completely separate community. John did not go into great detail on the process of becoming a skinwalker. He said no man who calls himself Diné would ever know such things. That might have been true a century ago, when skinwalkers still lived among the people, but in this day and age, the skinwalker is much too concerned with being found out, and so they isolate themselves, and brought all knowledge with them. Think of those tribes that are still being discovered in the jungles of Africa and South America, completely cut off from the rest of the world. Only this tribe is aware of the rest of the people and actually chooses to isolate. That all being said, of course, they still do go out among the people. It's just always at night, among only a small group of folks, and only for their own dark purposes. Exactly what skinwalkers gain from their behavior towards the Diné is disrupted among medicine men. John's understanding was that, aside from stealing livestock, their abilities feed off the fear that they instill in others, and to their connection to whatever dark entities. But somebody dying directly at the hands of a skinwalker is extremely rare. John then went on to say how a lot of things that are sometimes attributed to deaths of despair, such as suicide, overdose, alcohol poisoning, etc., could be traced to very powerful skinwalkers. It's said that a basic trait of the skinwalker is being able to instill fear in their victims, like a weak form of mind control. More powerful skinwalkers can actually cause folks to harm themselves. However, John wasn't sure if the mind control rumors were true. The powder of a corpse, the fabled favorite weapon of the skinwalker, blown on their victims' faces, could actually be how they make these things happen. While some say that the powder of a corpse is a powerful poison that slowly kills over the course of a few days, leaving no trace of itself in one's system. I heard of things like this before. Criminals in some parts of South America use something similar to make their marks essentially empty their bank accounts for them. John believes in both of these explanations. It is sometimes a cocktail of poison and human bone, and sometimes it's a drug, and the skinwalker uses this to instruct the victim to harm or kill themselves somehow. Having contact directly with their victims is too risky, both for the individual skinwalker as well as their clan, and is likely frowned upon. When a skinwalker does physically kill someone, the person either disappears or has their body found much later with their death ruled as an animal attack. John says that this is more common among weaker skinwalkers. One detail that stood out to Sam was the idea that skinwalkers communicate with other entities from other dimensions, and he pressed John on this a bit more. In Sam's words, he knew I was raised Catholic, so he explained them to me as basically being demons. I don't remember what it was, but even if I did, I most likely couldn't spell it. They are evil, inhuman spirits that try and come into our realm, or dimension, or plane, or whatever, but don't exactly have a physical presence, so they possess people. Or in the case of skinwalkers, they use them as their connection to this world. So some skinwalkers do the bidding of demons, and in return, the demons give them powers. But John also said that some really old skinwalkers aren't even people anymore. They're only living as empty vessels, but demons live inside them. I guess the idea is that demons give them powers in exchange for letting the demon possess their body by using it as their flesh puppet, after they die. According to John, they communicate with these beings through their knowledge of the portal system in the America's Southwest. This included places that are off the reservation, even though skinwalkers are careful about going off the res, as it can be more densely populated and carries with it a risk of being discovered. The few times they do, they are good at keeping a low profile, being actual shapeshifters and all. But because of their nature, they can't resist feeding off the fear of others. So small groups of campers and people driving alone at night off the res have stories as well. Sometimes lone visitors outside the reservation, but that are close to a portal, who are off camping, hiking, will straight up disappear under weird circumstances. This may be a stretch, but this reminded me of David's missing 411 research. I highly doubt skinwalkers are to blame for the majority of these mysterious disappearances. But what if John is saying is true? A few of them could have possibly fallen prey to one. These portals often exist in caves and small canyons, and require a full ritual, offerings, dances, and a sacrifice to open. What the sacrifice is, John isn't sure, but he guesses that disappearing hikers may have something to do with it. When the portals open, they are used for different things, communicating with spirits and demons, gaining more power, summoning other entities into our world, or even throwing themselves or others into the portals and leaving this world. Sam asked why they would go into the portals and what existed beyond them. It was another dimension that allowed them to observe our world, but not interact with it, as well as see things and beings that we cannot see or interact with in our own plane. He said that they would interact in that dimension with these things called chendis, which are the evil spirits of those deceased, said to be a manifestation of everything that was bad about a person. They would send chendis out to not only harm others and spread illness, but also report on which people were growing wise to the skinwalkers. This was where the belief that skinwalkers are not to be discussed come from. Chendis can listen to your conversations and report back to the skinwalkers who commune with them, and then using portals, show them where the offending individual lived. It was very important to the skinwalkers that much of the general population know nothing about them, their culture, their practices, and most importantly, who they are. Nowadays, of course, because skinwalkers isolate, protecting their identities was not as crucial, as anyone who saw their original forms would never be able to recognize them, as they were not members of the community. But John noted that there were select skinwalkers who would live alongside the communities, and sometimes in them, as a way of feeding off others' energy without directly stalking or scaring them. He told me a little story about this group of folks who lived near a weird old witch. This was back in the 1980s, I think. She would come into town but never buy anything from the stores or the markets or anything like that. Just walk around, stare at people. One day, a guy and his wife went into one of the cities off the rest for the weekend, and while they were at a restaurant, they saw her looking through the window at them. I actually painted this scene a while back, so they were wondering how the fuck she got out there, and it scared the shit out of them, like she just lived in a hogan and she didn't even have a car. She ended up disappearing, and that night, the wife had a dream that the old lady had gone down on all fours and turned into a fucked up looking coyote. On their way back to the res the next evening, they saw what they thought was an injured coyote on the side of the road. The husband was gonna get out to see what was up, but the wife made him stop. The coyote was looking straight at her, with the same stare that she saw in the old woman's eyes. It leapt up on its hind legs and ran off. The next day, the wife told everyone she could that the old lady was a skinwalker,
Rumor has it that the old witch got sick and died the next day. Do take notice of the words, rumor has it. Many people believe that if you learn and tell others of a skinwalker's identity, it can spell disaster for them, and is one of the few ways an average person can kill them. However, this is only partially true. It weakens the skinwalker by not only robbing them of their prey, but it doesn't kill them. But what does actually kill them? Other skinwalkers. According to John, the woman did not die of a random sudden illness. She simply left town. He believes to go back to her local skinwalker community. However, the next day she was found, not far from her own hogan, dead and mauled by a pack of animals, wolf bites, bear claw marks, and even evidence of being trampled by a horse were found on her body. When the authorities found the body, a local medicine man, whom John actually knew, instructed the police to say that she died of an illness. He wanted people to remain unaware that a community of skinwalkers was in their midst, so no curious, stupid folks would go looking for them. And that's part 2. I'll post part 3 tomorrow. Third part will go into detail on why Sam left the reservation. So again, full disclaimer, I cannot verify any of these stories. Believe what you can, or take it all with a grain of salt. So if skinwalkers are, say, for a select few, an isolated group, how do they add more to their ranks? They used to be easier to join, like if you were a medicine man and knew how to find them, and had completed the first ritual on your own. They will let you go through the rituals and train you. You have to complete the first ritual before even looking for the skinwalkers. That way they know that you reached the point of no return. John said that he didn't know the actual rituals, but he assumed it was the part where you kill a close friend or family member, so you couldn't really go back to your regular way of living, and so you robbed yourself of your humanity too. It's how they know that you're real, otherwise they just kill you on the spot. John told Sam he had no idea how skinwalkers were recruited. The most likely scenario would most likely be kidnapping someone very young and grooming them to murder the family they were taken from, or choosing to share their knowledge with people that the demons have scouted out as a spirit and potential addition to their ranks. It should be noted that according to John, pretenders almost never became real skinwalkers. No info on why. Sam and I guess that they most likely want the pretenders to do their thing and continue to exist, to throw folks off their trail. Finally, John had one last piece of information to share. Yes, these skinwalkers actually did transform into animals, and it was often to varying degrees of success. The more skilled skinwalkers could mimic an animal perfectly, to the point where you wouldn't be able to pick them out among a pack. But the issue is, a normal old coyote or sheep isn't scary if it looks and behaves exactly as it should. So skinwalkers on purpose transform into imperfect or unnatural creatures. Things such as larger size, weird proportions, even human features mixed in. One story that stood out to me in regards to the way skinwalkers present, mainly because it had to do with the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. My personal least favorite skinwalker story because it sounds so ridiculous and is barely even about actual skinwalkers. Okay, so first of all, let me say I think Skinwalker Ranch is mostly bullshit. John's heard the stories and says it's white people crap. People say its land is cursed by Denye because it was stolen from us, and they think we got a skinwalker on it. But we know that's not possible because they exist separate to the Denye, and we can't summon them. But there was a skinwalker on the land. Several, most likely. A tribe of skinwalkers that just refused to leave. So people said it was a Dinya curse. But most of the crazy UFO shit just doesn't track with me or John. Maybe some of it because Dinya have seen shit. But I don't know. A lot of it sounds bunk. But anyways, the reason I bring up Skinwalker Ranch is because one of the stories from the white people who lived there was that they saw this big ass wolf. Like bigger than any wolf in existence. The size of a horse maybe. This was actually true. I'm sure of it at least. They most likely added the UFO stuff for fun. Because just saying you saw a big wolf isn't a crazy enough story. But this wolf is an example of how they'll become a real animal. But they'll add some detail that doesn't add up or doesn't look right and actually makes it 10 times scarier. And sometimes the transformations aren't perfect anyways, and they keep it that way instead of trying to perfect it. There was this other story I heard online, most likely about a guy who saw a giant Doberman looking thing with yellow eyes, but looked like it had bits of flesh hanging off, almost like a zombie dog. I don't know how true the story is, but it does point out this characteristic. What happens when a skinwalker absorbs the skin of the animal they kill, but it's not a perfect animal, or the skin has started to decompose before they absorb it, but it looks scary as fuck so they don't mind. I bet some of them even wait for the flesh to rot before it's absorbed. What Sam is talking about here is how they transform. Basically, they can only transform into animals they kill themselves. They must skin the animal and cover themselves in the pelt, often while it is still warm and bloody. After a certain period of time, the animal skin will be absorbed by the skinwalker, and not only will they gain the ability to transform into the animal at will, but some of the features of the beast will begin to show in the skinwalker's human form. This is how many older skinwalkers, as they age, begin to gradually lose human features, only to be replaced with more animal ones. Their human skin ages, even decays, while their animal skin does not, remaining in the same state it was when they absorbed it. This is where the stench of decay that many associate with skinwalkers comes from. It's the human being, rotting. John began noticing that the fire was dying down, and it was getting late. He told Sam that he is not to speak a word of what he was told while on the reservation. The only way in which their speech was protected from the prying demons was the mixture in the fireplace, and the blessings that John had performed earlier in the day. The loud TV was there just in case anyone, human or skinwalker, was in the area and walked by to listen. He gave Sam a small wooden box filled with the same mixture he threw on the fire, as well as a few other various things that John said would protect him. He told Sam not to take his possessions of these things as some sort of free ticket to talk freely about skinwalkers. However, he said something about how he had many decades of experience in these matters and felt safe. Plus, he was gonna die soon. So if a skinwalker took him out of his misery, so be it. Sam didn't have that luck, so he needed to walk on the side of caution. Off the res, he was free to blab all he wanted about the shapeshifters, because as Sam said, who the fuck would believe me anyways? The next day, as Sam was getting ready to pack up and leave school, he received a call from John. "Shouldn't have told you that stuff," he said, and then told him not to come by the property for a few days. He assured Sam that he had everything taken care of and was safe, but wanted to be sure. He hung up before Sam could even get a word in. He let Jess know what her great uncle had said over the phone, and naturally, Jess had to know what it was John told him about. Sam, hesitating, told her point blank that John had given him more info on the skinwalkers. He did not go into any level of detail on what it was John said, out of respect for the old man's wishes. Jess, according to Sam, went pale.
It's so weird seeing your partner, who you know is a big skeptic, get scared by something like this. But I guess it just goes back to being raised Dinya, hearing these stories and stuff. Also, just because you're agnostic doesn't mean you just don't have some belief in the paranormal. She told me that John most likely attracted someone's attention by talking about that shit, but that we have to trust that he knows what he's doing. And then she told me I can't speak a single word of what I heard, and I am never to ask or even allow John to tell me anything anymore. She said something like words have power. You're not culturally Dinya, so you wouldn't get it. She laid into me a bit after that. I was kinda insulted, but in retrospect, she was right. It hurts to hear, but I think we all gotta take a step back. But Jess, alarmed as she was, put her trust in John and told Sam that they weren't to contact or visit his property until he said everything was okay. But that day never came. 2 nights later, Sam and Jess were awoken by a phone call from Jess's father. John was in the hospital. His body was taking a turn for the worse. The two rushed to the hospital, but John had passed away of a heart attack before they got there. For a while after John's passing, Sam, Jess, and their families lived in a pretty uneventful life. Sam thinks it was a period of about 3 or 4 months of relative calm. Jess had started looking into getting an MSW out of state, and Sam was grappling with a decision of whether or not he wanted to stay on the res or follow Jess wherever she would go. I asked Sam if there was any tension between him and Jess because of everything that happened, but he said they both sort of dropped the entire argument about Sam messing with Skinwalker knowledge. He does not think that Jess attributes what happened to John as a result of bringing Skinwalker attention onto him. After these 3 to 4 months of calm were up, strange things began happening to Jess's family members. Her father, mother, and younger brother all complained of a group of coyotes that ran around their property, keeping them up several nights a week with their noises and scratching on the side of the house. Her father had taken to standing on the porch with a shotgun some nights, but he never saw anything. Her cousin complained about missing livestock. They would completely disappear, but every once in a while, the corpse of a cow would be found a few yards from the property. Sometimes it was a cow that was missing days earlier and looked only freshly slaughtered. Then one night, Sam was staying over at Jess's house. While they were having dinner, Sam noticed it had gotten quiet outside. He told me it was windy outside, when all of a sudden, the wind could not be heard, and that's when he actually heard something tapping on the window. Jess pointed at the window behind Sam. When he turned around to look, he caught a glimpse of a figure for only a split second before it vanished. But he could hear it walking away from the window as the thing was very close to the house. The two were frozen in fear for a few seconds before the sound of the wind returned. They drew the blinds. Sam said they barely slept that night. Jess told him that she saw a large wolf with glowing yellow eyes looking into their window. She said it was a weird looking wolf and that it was smiling, almost like how a man smiles. There was a row of yellow teeth that looked strange like human teeth. Jess found herself in the coming days bothered by this. She told Sam it reminded her all too well of the two beings she saw all those years ago. They had someone come by the property to bless it, and that was that for everything that transpired at Jess's home. A few weeks after the incident, Sam was awoken by a series of noises. The noises, he said, started far away, but were loud enough to wake him up. He said they grew in volume as they grew closer. He estimated that there were about a minute or so in between. Each noise was getting closer. From far away, they sounded like your typical wolf or dog, but as they got closer, they sounded more bizarre. As he said it, It's really hard to say exactly why these noises were so scary. Like, I was shivering in fear. Wave after wave and after wave of chills, dude. My eyes were watering. I felt like I was having a panic episode. They didn't sound like any animals I knew. It started like a wolf howl, but then made weird gurgling noises that went on for a few more seconds after. The noises were really loud at the front end, violent, like they were a warning. Suddenly, Sam heard a noise from inside his own home. He tells me he grabbed his pistol from his closet and burst through his bedroom door, only to see an empty house with the front and back doors wide open, swaying in the wind. Looking out the back door, he said he saw two wolves running away in the moonlight, but their gait was off, as though they had the wrong set of hind legs. The next day, Sam dialed the medicine man who blessed Jess's place. He was an old friend of John's. When he came by, he first listened to Sam's story, and then inspected the home. The medicine man, in a sort of roundabout way, told him it was indeed a yenaglooshi, and that he had caught the attention of something very old, very powerful, and very evil. In fact, the medicine man had never heard of any being of the sort to actually enter another person's dwelling place. That fact alone terrified the man, enough to where he said, "I don't know what my blessing will do. Best case scenario, it'll keep it off your property. It won't keep it off you. Worst case scenario, it'll make it mad." I thought, shit, well, it was worth it just to try for the possibility of it working, I guess. How fucked up is all this? Sam also showed the man the box of items that John had given him to see if they held any significance. The man frowned, saying he didn't wish to speak ill of the dead, but John had made a small error in giving Sam what he thought were things that would protect him. The man went to his truck and came back with another item. Sam won't tell me what the items were. This is out of respect for the Dinya traditions. He also says that he didn't even know what half of the stuff was. So the medicine man told Sam to put that with the other things, but that it was no guarantee. He said there was no one-size-fits-all solution to warding off dark witches. Witches, which by the way, is how he refers to skinwalkers. So witches are superstitious, but some more than others. Some of them have learned that certain practices don't do anything, so they just laugh those off, while some others find it actually disrespectful. Finally, he performed the blessing. He told Sam that if things don't improve, he may need to get help from someone else, or multiple others, and then he gave him the info of some other medicine man whom he trusted. He closed out by saying that John was most likely the best person. He knew how to deal with these things, in spite of the slip-up with the items he gave Sam. That night, Sam said he was sleeping peacefully, which continued for about a week. Then one night, Sam woke up to use the bathroom. He didn't switch on any lights, but noticed two very strange things. For one, it was freezing. We live in the desert, but it's never been that cold at night, that time of year. And I didn't have the AC on because I'm not a diva like you. And also, it fucking reeked. His house smelled of rotting flesh. After using the bathroom, he went back to bed and then had an incredibly vivid dream. 6 tall, lanky, skinned men in animal pelts, wearing skulls with bits of flesh still clinging to them. He remembers them clear as day. 2 appear to be dressed as wolves, one as a sheep, one as a coyote, and another as a deer, with broken antlers. They were standing around all glaring at him, with striking yellow eyes. They barely moved. In the words of Sam, they looked like people who hadn't eaten in weeks, almost zero body fat or muscle, and one of them did not look well. The deer man, I'm talking about gray skin, infections, almost like a zombie. It was disgusting. Sam woke up in a cold sweat. He told me that in the dream, he was just standing there as their eyes bore into him. He actually knew he was dreaming while it was happening. His first and so far only instance of lucid dreaming. He told me of how desperate he wanted to wake up, but he couldn't. When he left his room, he saw 5 sets of footprints in dirt. There were no footprints leading to where they actually were, just 5 sets of footprints, as though something had just appeared and disappeared in one spot out of thin air. There were also 6 men in his dream, but he never found the other set of footprints, assuming that these prints belonged to the man in his dream. When he told the medicine man about this, he was rightfully baffled and terrified. He told Sam to call the others, but that he doubted the effectiveness of their practices in light of the information that he shared. He still offered a blessing, which Sam accepted. Sam did indeed make a few calls and told several other medicine men about what happened. They told him that something very dark had set its eyes on him and that he was to be very cautious. He basically lived with Jess until the semester ended, only going home to grab something every once in a while. Sam moved back to the Chicago area for a brief period before Jess started her first semester for her master's in another city, where he joined her. That's around the time we met on a gig while he was working as a freelance photographer. Whether he left or not because of the encounters and the dream, he's never really actually said. I know he was looking to live in a city with an arts community, but I do think the encounters were the straw that broke the camel's back. Sam says that he doesn't know if he wants to return to the res, but he still goes every now and then to see his dad. I'm sure the skinwalkers miss him greatly. It was late June of 1968. My dad was 12. My grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson, Arizona to Concho, Arizona. Concho was very different, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and buttes against a larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springville volcanic range. Well, Old Concho, as it's referred to now, sits among the high desert with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large cottonwood trees. The buttes and ridges boasted large twisted cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at the time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest. Therefore, petrified wood was found on the valley floor. There were also numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in the Concho area for pretty cheap. My great-uncle had 2 sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Zach. Tony was 13 and Zach was 11. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscapes, joined by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned homesteads, most likely from the 19th century. Every morning, they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great aunt and uncles had only one rule that was for the children, and that was to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one summer morning, they ended up hiking towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon an arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they want to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started following it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling, like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well, no breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more a sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half mile or so down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly, Sarge began a low growl, hair standing up on his back. This actually startled all three of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything, so encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted to the spot, growling and barking. All three of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash. They hadn't noticed it at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. With adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge, the dog darting after them. The whole time the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. They stopped at the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from the canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here, the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone that protruded from the ground. They noticed that there were a lot of petroglyphs dotting the black rocks, geometric shapes, animal, human figures. There were so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with a trunk and ate their lunch in shade. Bellies full and excitement replacing fear, they hurried along the trail as it slowly zigged and sagged the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rock falls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trails. Lots of spirals and horn-looking man. My dad even said there was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail disappeared. Only open space of the edge of a cliff. There was nowhere else to go. The cliff dropped off to one side, and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other side. My dad, he was disappointed, but also a little relieved, as the sun was getting further west, and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance, as well as the holy mountain and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo res. Even though they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside, a side canyon. They hadn't noticed it on the way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was about 4 feet wide. Looking at it, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like it was twisting in knots. The hair on the back neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as scared as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said if they didn't want to go, it was fine, that they could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted. That's when Sarge ran down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he would follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, blowing through the canyon and trees, making a creepy sound. It was quiet except the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices on the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still, Tony and Zach had not returned. A large cloud had covered the sun, and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped about 3 feet and screamed. Then he heard laughing. It was Tony and Zach. They looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they said. "We found some Indian steps and they lead to a cave." They begged my dad to come see. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad ended up following them, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed them. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around a bend, and about 20 yards into the canyon was more wide, about 20 to 30 feet across, and there were indeed foot and handholds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before, when his parents had taken him to Chaco Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones in Chaco and only went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of a small cave. He shivered, from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon, there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and handholds to climb up to the cave, against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but they slowly and carefully made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again, and the dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof, so they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice that the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rocks and debris now revealed itself to be pots, beautiful, painted pots of all shapes and sizes, black on white, painted with geometric patterns, and animals, red pots and even some yellow ones, large pots holding dried corn and crusty squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads. They even found some instruments like drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved now towards the second bit of light streaming in from a crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors, and sizes. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects in alcoves in the wall. My dad moved closer to one, and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body. It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches and its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. He took a leap back. Tony and Zach also froze.
The walls were lined with alcoves filled with dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see into the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous screech broke the silence of the cave. All three boys jumped, and my dad, looking in the direction from where the sound came, saw two red and glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing red eyes. Suddenly, the cave was washed over with the stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boys, slowly. Another hideous growl, screech, jolted them from being petrified in place. The eyes were moving fast now, right towards them, and they heard what sounded like running footsteps. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in a blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours, or a giant coyote. He can't be sure. He pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to also run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around to scrabble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next. His face turned into a wash of horror as he went down. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain by now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. As fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of footholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now, and even feel it. He refused to look up as he was going down, trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds. He heard Tony scream from below him, and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to scream with pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look back up. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaped from the cliffside down the last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen looking at the cave and ancient staircase. All the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic, and not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon. Finally, before they passed the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another screech rang from the cave, and at that moment, Sarge in a full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot and handhold staircase and bellowed up that cave, the hair on his back standing straight up, snarling and growling. The sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath. The sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony at this point was now crying, his face washed with pain. His arm, he said. He thinks he broke it. Zach was silent. My dad was then asking Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded he sure the hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog, in pain. "Sarge," my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. My dad screamed again, tears coming from his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. My dad thinks he hears something. He looks up to the canyon entrance. It sounds like drums. My dad sits there confused. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums are getting loud. Is this in his mind? Where is Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. "Luke, we have to go." The drums are louder now, and he can hear faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. "Don't you hear that?" He screams and shakes my dad. "We have to run, now." My dad is woken from his grief
As fear washes over him again, he runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the arroyo, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm dominating the southern horizon, lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. He tells Tony and Zach they need to cross the arroyo as fast as possible. If it floods, they will be stuck on the side with the basalt ridge, with whatever that thing was. They make their way down carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now start hearing thunder rolling across the air, and the wind has increased. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple of more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only 30 yards or so ahead, so they scrabble their way towards it. The water starts rising now at an alarming rate. They start going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted, but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is in the rear, starts to hear loud splashing coming from behind him. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. That's when he feels something lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy fills my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb out of the arroyo. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and loud snapping coming from the arroyo. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris filled water crash through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches as the flash flood fills the little canyon. Tony and Zach are lying on the ground, gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath. He feels dizzy. He feels tears welling up, and Sarge comes and licks his face. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back. His ear is also torn. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He is asking what it was, but no one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty badly, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They are exhausted. They drink some rainwater that has pooled in one of the large sandstone boulders. They figure whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the arroyo for a few hours. So they slowly make their way back to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to fill the landscape. The 3 boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun has set, and my grandparents and great uncle and aunt are worried sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them about their horrendous tale, and Tony's parents rush Tony to the nearest doctor. That night, my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite him being extremely exhausted, he is plagued with nightmares. One that he speaks about all the time is especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes up though, in the morning, his curtains are closed. The rain continued for 2 or 3 days. The boys don't leave their homes, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great uncle are convinced what the boys encountered was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the cave they found. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see the cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great uncle's jeep. My grandpa and great uncle also bring along a couple of shotguns and rifles in case this lion is still in the cave. The boy showed them the arroyo, which has been filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flooding. They find the trail and start making their way up, my grandpa on the front and great uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs, caught in a cedar bush. They have been shredded. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood, and they ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which has been blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great uncle get the log out of the way, and they go to the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of day, the cave is more illuminated, so he and my great uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there again. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony with his broken arm stayed home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they are told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he is stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks and sees nothing. My grandpa and great uncle end up questioning the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge, and the boys hadn't made up being that scared. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they will look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know that this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their minds. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph, but they can't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that is parked on the far bank of the arroyo. As they load up, sun sinking low in the western sky, my dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream, but something in the shadow of a cliff catches his eye. He squints against the sun and sees two red shining eyes looking back at him. His blood goes cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months. As soon as my grandpa finished the highway project, he got a job offer in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My dad said after that encounter, he had nightmares every night and would swear that at night he would see the red eyes outside of the house until they finally moved from Concho. After he moved, he never had a nightmare about the eyes again. But it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he became an adult. But that is a story for another time. In 1987, my family and I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, a nice place, smaller than most cities, but interesting. The people there were kind, at least in the inner city. In the neighborhood where my family had moved, everyone was quiet and kept to themselves. Real quaint if you were the type of person who liked those kind of things. For me, I found it odd. No one talked to my family or bothered to communicate while we were staying there. It was like they were hiding some kind of secret. But I did notice one thing. No one came near the house. At first I thought I understood why. The house wasn't exactly in good shape, if you know what I mean. The walls outside were rusted. The grass outside was tall and filled with bushes, and the place looked like a dump. But after a while, I started to notice things. People on the streets wouldn't come near the house at all. They acted as if it was going to devour them or something. Kids on the street would point and stare, and eventually, after I started school, I learned just why the people there were so afraid of our house. "You know that place is haunted." That's the first thing someone said to me as I stepped into school. Not even a single hello or a welcome. No, I got nothing of that. At first I was a bit confused. "What's haunted?" I said to the kid in front of me, the one who decided to make that statement. He didn't say anything. He just turned around and started walking away. I was a bit curious now. I wonder if what that kid said was true, or if it was just some kind of prank, something to pull on the new kid. But I was very wrong. I now know. School went on for a while, and everything seemed fine. My father and mother were happy. My sister, she was happy as well. But I noticed things started to happen to me. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a heavy feeling on my chest. It was as if something was laying on top of me or pressing against my body. But when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. During those nights I swore I was being watched, as if someone was stalking me. There was this dark corner in my room that would appear every night. It was the only part of my room that was invisible during the nighttime. It was from that corner that I felt something watching me, as if someone was standing there. But I was too afraid to ever go and check. Not to mention, I was always very tired, and I tried to shrug it off and sleep, until one night, that is. As I laid in bed that night, I was having trouble sleeping as usual. That heavy feeling on my chest had returned, and it was getting hard for me to breathe. I had this feeling of overwhelming fear, but I didn't know why. It was like I was fearing for my dear life, without any reason. My eyes were open slightly, and as I gazed around the room, I swore I saw the shadows moving in the moonlight, zooming past my vision as if they were getting closer and closer. Eventually, the shadows formed into what appeared to be a man in a dark, long cloak. I then woke up fully. I took a deep breath, and I backed up against the wall behind my bed. But after that, I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed or something. Whatever that thing was, that man, was coming closer. It sat down on my bed, and it began to crawl towards me. I saw its dark hands press against my covers. The fingers resembled claws of some sort, but that wasn't its most terrifying feature. It had no face, no eyes. It was just darkness, a living shadow. I was panicking now. It kept coming closer and closer until it was in my face. You know, my parents always told me to pray when I felt scared, that God would answer my prayers and protect me. Well, he must have forgotten about me this time, because no amount of prayer whatsoever seemed to be helping. This thing was in my face. Its hands were reaching out, and just as it touched my face, it spoke in the deepest, darkest voice I had ever heard. I couldn't make out what it said. It was speaking in some kind of odd language, but even if it spoke English, I doubt I would have listened. I was too scared, too shaken up to pay attention. This thing spoke to me for I don't know how long, its dark, shadowy figure looming over me as it trailed its claw-like finger across my cheek, cutting into my skin slightly as some blood leaked down into my shirt. I thought this was it. I really thought I was going to die that night. However, I heard a knock at my door. I was relieved in some ways, but I was still scared that this thing was sitting on top of me, and for all I knew, it was about to eat or kill me or something. After the third knock, my mother walked into the room, and she looked over at me. She couldn't see anything. I guess she acted like I wasn't there, as if I wasn't in my room. Maybe that thing on top of me blocked her view. I really don't know, but all hope was drained from my body at that very moment. I figured this was it. I was done for. But in the blink of an eye, I saw that thing get off me. It walked back to the spot where it first formed, and it began to change. My mother had left the room by now, but I was more focused on what this thing was turning into. For a moment, it looked as if I was staring into a silhouette of myself. The creature, the man, this being, whatever it was, it then waved to me, its still dark and shadowy body fading into a black mist. I didn't stay in that room. I got up, I ran downstairs, and I slept on the couch, with every light on possible. The next morning, I awoke early, before everyone else. I packed some clothes, small food, and some extra cash that my father had left in a jar on top of the fridge. I wrote a small note detailing what happened on the counter in the kitchen. Then I left, and I never looked back. I was 17 at the time, but mentally, I felt much older. I eventually crossed state lines, going back to my home state of Texas, where I got a job as a clerk in some crappy little convenience store on the south side of Dallas. Times were tough, but I pushed through. To be honest, I had been wanting to leave home for a long time. I just needed a reason to do it. In some fucked up way, I guess what happened was that reason. But looking back, I never did hear from my family again. I sent them letters, pictures, but nothing. I never got anything back. I figured they either forgot about me, or they simply just didn't care. It wasn't until recently that I began to research on what happened that night. I had been having odd dreams lately. It seemed that this strange, heavy feeling on my chest had returned. I didn't know why, but I felt that if this thing was coming back for me, I wanted to know what it was. I then visited the local library, but I didn't find much interest. The closest I came to anything was an old Navajo legend called yenaglooshi. Apparently, it was a demonic force, or a person that would assume the shape of animals or people. It seemed logical, but I couldn't understand what such a thing would want with me. I was scared. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight, until someone I hadn't seen in a very long time showed up at my door. My mother. She was happy to see me, but she didn't seem that different since when I last saw her. Now mind you, I hadn't seen her for 25 years. I found it a bit odd that she still looked so young, but I shrugged it off. I was happy to see her. So very happy. We talked for a while, but something was off. Every time she looked at me, I got this cold feeling in my body. I felt as if I was staring at a different person. And after a while, I began to feel weak. I was tired. I hadn't slept for days. So I just went up to my room. Before that, however, my mother was telling me how my father left not long after I did, and that he took my sister with her. It was shocking, but I didn't care so much. I just wanted to sleep. But as I lay down in my bed, that feeling returned. That very same feeling I hadn't felt in 25 years. Someone is watching me from the corner of my room. I'm trying not to pay attention. I'm simply going to turn over and close my eyes. I'm not sure though if I'll make it through this night. I don't know if anyone will ever find this, but if you do, please find my family, inform them of what happened here. The journal of John F. Moncada was found thrown in the corner of his room by police earlier this month. He was laying in his bed, calm and lifeless, when they arrived. After examining his journal, police determined that the man had been up for a week or so before he eventually died from a heart attack. They also suspect that the man was hallucinating before he died, as the woman he claimed to be his mother was never there. In fact, she died 23 years ago in a house fire, along with the rest of his family. Strange, his bedroom window was open when the police arrived, and many neighbors claimed they saw a dark figure emerge a few nights ago. Even though there is little proof other than the witnesses' reports, the mirror in his bathroom, however, the police found many strange symbols carved into the glass, those of which were later translated from the Navajo language. There was one word, and it was burden. Police aren't sure if it holds any relevance to what happened here, but the case is now officially closed. I grew up in Winslow, Arizona, but also lived for a period of time on the reservation near the Puerco River. My grandparents have a home which is more to the east and not all that far from the New Mexico state line. When my mother and aunts were children, they lived further west. Their house was in a wooded area, and though there were neighbors, there wasn't that many. When I was young, I often heard stories of skinwalkers, but never really believed until I got older, and after my grandmother, a Christian woman, not prone to superstition or telling lies, shared with me and my cousins an encounter that occurred when my mother and her sisters, my aunts, were still small children. They were living at the time in a 3-bedroom house, full wood construction, surrounded by a small fence, and with chicken wire around the front porch. One night, when all the children are in bed, and my grandfather is off working, she is awakened by a noise that she hears outside. She gets up out of bed, and in the dark, makes her way out to the living room. It is then that she hears something up on the roof of the house. She said that she knows immediately what it is. Her first instinct is to go out to the front porch and curse the creature that has picked her and her family as a target. As she makes her way to the front door, she hears it walking around over her head. Then, as soon as she starts to open the door to go out, she hears it jump down by the side of the porch, open the porch door, come up to the steps, and right up to the kitchen window, only about 10 feet away from where my grandmother is standing. She says that she is really scared now, but as the porch light is on, she thinks that she can take a peek through the window and see what is out there. Just as she starts to pull aside the curtain, her whole body freezes, as if she has no control over it whatsoever. However, she can hear just fine, and whatever is out there on the porch starts to scratch at the kitchen window, as if it's trying to get into the house. My grandmother says she starts praying and asking God to make whatever it is go away. And this is before she becomes a Christian. Finally, the creature gives up and leaves. Once it is gone, my grandmother is able to move again. She says she knows it was a skinwalker. Her own mother had often shouted into the night, and her father would shoot with a shotgun into the darkness whenever a skinwalker came around their whole gun. The next morning, when my grandfather comes home from work, she tells him what happened. He takes the ladder and goes up into the roof and discovers a bundle of dry grass and twigs placed there alongside of the chimney. He tells her that the skinwalker might had wanted to start a fire in order to get her and the girls out of the house. Later that day, one of the older men from the reservation comes by the house and puts ash over the doorway. Even to this day, my grandmother swears that she knows who that skinwalker was. But what's more weird or strange is that she's never told us, and even now she won't say who it was. In Arizona, there is an older woman who lives not far from my grandmother's house. She works about halfway to Gallup, New Mexico, maybe about 20 minutes away from my grandmother's house. On cold mornings, she gets up before the sun to start her car and let it warm up before she makes the drive. Her house is surrounded by a dark wood fence, which is about 5 feet tall. This one morning, as she is making her way out to the car, she hears voices that seem to be chanting and giggling. She thinks they are coming from over by this low hill to the east of her house and back from the road. She walks over to the fence and takes a look, but it's still dark and the hill is covered with trees and bushes. She doesn't see anything or anyone, and the voices have stopped. She doesn't give it another thought. goes about her usual morning routine, and eventually leaves for work. A few nights later, she is bringing in her laundry from the outside line when she hears really loud music coming from the neighbor's yard across the street. She decides to be nosy and walks over to the fence to see which one of the boys it is, thinking that maybe she can ask him to lower the volume some. Just as she gets to the fence, she sees a dark figure step from the trees on that low hill and make its way down towards the street. It's moving kind of funny, as if it's not accustomed to its own body. She screams, and it starts to run really fast towards the young man playing the boombox. He must have heard her, because she says he lowered the volume. However, when she turns back around to see where the figure has gone to, it's now gone. She says that she was certain that it was a skinwalker. There's an old crow story dating back to the turn of the 20th century about a man and his daughter driving their wagon along one of the back dirt roads of the reservation. They're on their way to the market. The daughter, about 10 years of age, notices an old woman up ahead. She is limping along the middle of the road and mumbling to herself. Just then, her father moves the horse pulling the wagon, and it breaks into a faster pace, trotting up alongside the old woman. As soon as the father is in reach, he raises his buggy whip and trashes the woman across the back. Then and there, right before the eyes of the little girl, the old woman withers down in size, turns into a coyote, and runs off into the trees by the roadside. Her father, not in the least bit surprised, turns to her and says, "Let that be a lesson to you." The canyons throughout the Four Corners, for those who don't know, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, Nevada fits in there too, are populated with signs and indications of the presence of the ancestors of the tribes native to the area. Most common are petrographs and petroglyphs, drawings on stones, the remains of cliff dwellings, and ancient roads, which seem to run to nowhere. There are also man-made structures of stone houses and temples. Most of these areas are accessible to visitors. However, they are also monitored by local and tribal authorities, which protect them and ensure their preservation. That being said, it is not uncommon to find graffiti and other evidence of disregard for these historical sites. Several years ago, a friend of mine, a local Hopi guide for the tourists, and I are poking around these ruins. It's already dark, but if you are going to go to these places for the reason we go, see if there's anything of value that hasn't yet been recovered. You have to go at a time you're likely not to be seen. I have gone to other similar places with this guy, and we had some luck with small relics that tourists will buy. By the way, I am Hopi as well. We are only there for a short period when we hear something moving towards the ridge and only a few yards from where we are. My friend takes a pistol from his waist and points it over to the trees. He's calling out in our native language some words we both know and which are generally used to ward off dark spirits. By the sound of things, whatever is out there is getting more bold and coming closer, but we still can't see anything. At the same time, there is this feeling of dread building up inside of me, and I'm thinking too how nice it would be to have a pistol instead of the flashlight that I am carrying. At this time, we're both thinking Skinwalker. But that's just part of who we are as Hopi. My friend then starts backing the two of us towards the edge, running up and over our heads. Just then, this sharp, yipping sound breaks out, followed by this sustained high-pitched scream which slices right through me like an icy wind. I find myself praying before I realize I am doing it already. My friend is starting to chant in Hopi, his voice filled with fear. We both have no doubt it is a skinwalker, and it is coming right at us. I lift my flashlight and point its bright beam in the direction of that blood-chilling screech. The skinwalker, still in the dark, responds by making this throat mucus-filled sound, a sort of coughing noise. I am waving the light all around trying to get a glimpse of it. Just then, I guess my friend can't take it anymore and starts firing his pistol, the rounds tearing through the bushes. I drop for cover and duck my head, saying the Hail Mary the whole time. When he stops firing, I look up in time to see this dark shape run up the sheer slope of the ridge, just to the other side of the trees and brush. We didn't hang around to see where it went, leaving the ruins behind and getting back to our truck. So if you ever go anywhere near the Four Corners, don't stay past nighttime. And whatever you do, don't venture out into any native, man-made structures, temples, or anything related to ancient native tribes. You might just come across a skinwalker. I myself am not Navajo, but my friend is. He grew up around Gallup, New Mexico. He loves to tell me stories about skinwalkers. He knows it gives me the chills. According to him, they are not like werewolves, but are dark spirits that use the skins or even the flesh of anything living that may serve its purpose. They will also use animal parts as totems. For example, they will take the claws from a bear or the antlers from a deer. They are known to come after humans too, but he says that's a native thing and that white people have nothing to worry about. He says the only way to make it stop bothering you is to take away its disguise. The scariest story he tells is about this Navajo trucker that his father knows. Every night he makes the long run to the reservation from Gallup. One night, when halfway there, he hears a loud noise against the front passenger side of his truck. Thinking he might have hit something, he pulls off to the shoulder of the road to take a look, but he finds nothing, not even a mark or dent on the fender. So he gets back on the road and resumes driving. But only a few seconds later, he sees something in his rear view mirror towards the middle of the road and moving up on him. And it's not another vehicle. Then, just as suddenly as it appears, it's gone. Shrugging it off, he goes back to paying attention to the road, with his semi going about 60 miles per hour. He chances to look in his mirror, and again, he sees this thing chasing him, and it is moving fast. Just like that, it's at his driver's door, and holding onto the handle and striding along. Then, without warning, it turns to him with its dog-like face and dull, dark eyes, and smashes in the window. The driver slams on the brakes. The cab of the truck goes into a slide, the trailer jackknifing past him. The whole time, this creature is holding on to the door and reaching in through the broken window trying to grab him. Somehow, the truck comes to a stop, blocking both lanes of the road straight across. The driver is so scared, he doesn't even notice the creature is gone, and instead throws the door open and runs off into the desert. Now, he must have passed out or something, because he awakes with the sun coming up and finds himself huddled by this rock formation. He's dusty, a little dirty, and missing his shirt, but is otherwise unharmed. Sitting there gaining his bearings, the events of the previous night come back to him. He gets up to his feet, dusts himself off, and walks out back to the highway, not knowing what to expect with his truck. However, as he reaches the road, he sees it parked as neat as it can be there on the shoulder. When he gets up to it, he sees there's nothing wrong with the driver's door window. It's as if he imagined the whole thing. He does notice, however, a series of small scratches on the driver's door all around the handle, as if something was clawing at it. These marks were not there previously. This story comes from a 28-year-old young man who calls himself Leo. When he was a boy, his grandmother, a Navajo woman, would tell him stories about dark spirits and skinwalkers. He recalls he used to wave her off, telling her there was no such things. In fact, whenever he would go out at night, he would make sure to tell her and make fun of her that he'll be walking alone. However, his arrogance came back to get him shortly after his 17th birthday. On the evening in question, he is out cruising about with two of his cousins, just drinking a few beers, listening to music, and doing a whole bunch of laughing. From St. Michael's, Arizona, their purposeless selves takes them through Sawmill, and then along the back roads, in and around Chinle, where they eventually get lost for a while, driving deep in the woods and looking for anything they might recognize as a way back to the road. Leo is sitting in the back seat on the passenger side and looking out the window. He recalls it is definitely after 10 p.m. There, deep in the trees, he sees a single fire. The flames contain to a small space and close to the ground. He is just about to say something to the others when they too react. Looking now in the direction they are pointing, he sees many more of these small fires, literally dozens of them, popping up there within the trees, burning brightly for a moment or two, and then going out, only to have others ignite but a few feet or yards away. This goes on all the while they are driving along through this one stretch, and seems to be keeping pace with them. Leo first has the thought that it is maybe a controlled fire process, something the local rangers and fire department do to control the undergrowth to reduce the potential for out-of-control forest fires. But being that it is nighttime, he quickly discards the idea. Besides, he notices and mentions to his two cousins that the fire so close to the base of the trees should be setting them on fire as well. Yet not one of them goes up or, from where he's looking, even gets scorched. They're both spooked and intrigued. They pull the car alongside the road and get out, beers in hand. However, they stay by the car with no desire to actually go into the woods. One of the cousins starts calling out to see if anyone will answer. The other cousin is less eager, telling everyone to be quiet and listen. But there's nothing to listen to. The fires, which continue to flare up and die down, aren't making any noise. For example, there's no crackling of anything burning, not even small twigs. Then within seconds, they find themselves standing in the dark. Every fire has now gone out, and there's not even new ones. Not believing their own eyes, they walk into the trees towards where they had agreed that one of the near fires had been. But no matter how much they look around, they can't find any sign of fire. No smoke, no charred ground, and no ashes. Nothing. There isn't even the smell of burned leaves or wood they expect to linger. But what's even more strange is that when they do go back to the car, they can't help but notice the smell of smoke on their clothes. The next morning comes, and Leo tells his grandmother and mother what he had seen. While his mother shows very little interest, there is a knowing gleam in the eyes of his grandmother, but she has nothing to say. Almost immediately after that night, Leo says everything that could possibly go wrong does. First, each one of his cousins that were with them are involved in unexplainable accidents and are hurt seriously enough. One of them receives a second-degree burn when the gas tank of a motorcycle he is working on ignites without reason or warning. The second one suffers a broken collarbone when the branch of a tree in his yard snaps and comes down across his shoulder. He too has no warning, even though he acknowledges that it is the same tree that was hit by lightning a month or so earlier. Strange enough, both accidents happen on the same day and almost at the same time. As for Leo, even though it's much less painful, all of the family vehicles break down within days of each other. It is at this point that the family makes the choice to seek the help of the local medicine man. Together, they climb into his aunt's car. She's the mother of the cousin with the broken collarbone, which had worked fine earlier that day, but now it refuses to start. Leo suggests that it's the battery, so they attempt to jumpstart it with his grandfather's truck. It is not in the best shape. It's driven only locally, and it's not even registered or insured, but it always starts. But this time, it won't turn over. Finally, they find a neighbor who is nice enough to take them. When they get to the medicine man and tell him everything, starting with the fires, he says to them, "You already know who is doing this to you." Leo recalls they all just look at one another, each without a clue. His grandmother, however, tells them that she'll explain it on the ride back home. She sends them out to the car to wait while she speaks with the medicine man. When she comes back, she tells them that it's gonna be okay. On the way back, Leo's grandmother tells them about her great-grandfather. She says that the family had a 30-acre plot, which they had been living on for generations. When he passed away, and before his own children could lay claim to the property, a man and his wife built themselves a crude hogan on the far side of the property and moved in. When her great-grandfather's sons, one of whom was her grandfather, tried to evict the man from the property, he used dark medicine to chase them off. He even kept their own father from building a house on the far side of the property along the arroyo. She then tells Leo that the woods in which he and his cousins saw the fire is the outer edge of that property, and the smoke they smelled on themselves was the mark of the skinwalker. She says the old squatter and his wife are both more than 100 years old, and even though no one has seen them for years, she's still sure that they live there still. All Leo knows is that since the visit with the medicine man, he and his family have had no further experiences with the skinwalker. He says that there are nights when the dogs bark, and it seems they try to break free from their chains, like there's something out in the darkness, which they want no part of. On those nights, Leo is sure to say his prayers, both in Navajo and the ones he learned in the Catholic Church. He's convinced the words will protect him from the old man and his wife, two powerful skinwalkers that he doesn't want playing around in his head.
When I was 12 years old, my 15-year-old brother and I experienced a very horrific event when we were at our grandparents' cabin. My grandparents own a cabin on a large island in South Sweden, which contains only 2 cabins, separated by slightly less than a mile. One summer, my brother and I, along with my mother and sister, went to visit them for a weekend. The thing we did most when staying there was to go fishing. On our first day of the stay, we set everything up, and all we had to do now was to dig for a worm, which was used for bait. Grabbing a shovel along with a bucket, we went to the back of the cabin and down a short slope and through a trail, where we would find plenty of worms. The forest is very dense and barely no light shines through, which makes the whole setting a bit unnerving for me, as I have always been easily scared. As we're walking through the trail, I hear something like walking, and I look at my brother with a very scared face. He just brushes it off, as if there was nothing to be afraid of, and says that we go check it out. We walk a bit further down the trail, which I know leads to an open meadow, as I have been there looking for mushrooms with my mom at previous occasions. Before we get to the open, my brother holds up his hands as to indicate for me to stop. I looked over his shoulder and see behind the trees what appears to be a moose just standing there, looking directly at us. I was relieved as I knew they were friendly, and as I had seen plenty of moose nearby. My brother, however, who has never been scared of anything, looks back at me with the biggest eyes I have ever seen, and the most pale I have ever seen someone. Tells me that we should get out of here. Without asking questions, I start to walk back as he keeps pushing me as to make me move quicker, and as we reach the cabin, we are pretty much running. My mom and grandma are sitting at the front doorsteps as we get to the front, and I tell them that we saw a moose. My brother, on the other hand, remains completely silent. Safe to say, there was no fishing that day. The following day, we didn't even bring up fishing. I'm sitting on the porch reading a magazine, and my brother is sitting inside the couch doing the same, even though he still has that scared look in his eyes. I spent the following hour or two reading several magazines, until my grandpa is asking where the shovel is. I realize that we left it when we were looking for the worm the previous day, and I tell him where it is. Just as he is about to go get it, my mother tells me that my brother and I have to go get it, since we left it there. She also tells me that we should dig up some worms, as she wants us to go fishing later that day. I don't ask questions, but my brother seems unnerved by it. This made everything more eerie for me, as my brother is not really scared at all. He's actually pretty much the opposite of me. We put on our shoes and head to the back of the cabin, and walk down the trail heading for where the shovel and bucket is. Once we're about 10 feet from where the shovel is, my brother stops and tells me I should go and dig, as he did it the last time. I do as he says, and I start digging for worms. I have this very strong feeling that he stayed back because he was scared something would happen. I start hearing the bushes around me sway, and then I hear what you could call sneaky footsteps moving closer and closer. Everything is all the more creepy as I have no idea where the footsteps are coming from. 1 second I'm sure they're coming from my right, and the next it feels like they're coming from the completely opposite direction. I quickly put the few worms I found in the bucket, and as I fumble to pick up the shovel, I feel as if somebody is watching me. My brother walks up to me and helps me seal the bucket, and I tell him it feels like someone is watching us, to which he responds that we should leave. Just as we turn around and are ready to head back, I hear a crack behind me and turn around. I look down the trail and see the moose once again, peeking at me from behind a tree. They look very different from what they usually look like. At the same time, I'm more confused and curious than I am scared, and my brother is just completely silent. I can't quite see the whole body of it, but I know that something is wrong. I stand for a couple more seconds watching it, as it's staring directly at us. From what I can see, I realize that it is now standing on 4 legs. It is actually leaning as an old man with a really bad posture, with his arms hanging straight down. I also had this weird sensation that this thing was trying to talk to me, saying, "Let me help you." In a few seconds I get struck with a panic and start walking really fast back to the cabin, my brother doing the same. It only takes a second before we are both in full sprint running back,
and I don't look back until we have reached the cabin. I turn around and the moose-like creature is nowhere to be seen. We put the shovel by the shed where we took it and bring the bucket with worms to the front where my mom and our grandparents are sunbathing. The day happens to go on as if nothing happened, and we don't even speak about it. Ever since this happened, I have never brought it up again with my brother. We both just sort of knew that it would feel wrong to speak about it, and none of us have visited my grandparents at the cabin since then. To this day, I'm not sure at all what I saw. I mentioned it to my friend once, and he told me that if what I saw was true, then it was most likely a Wendigo. He showed me some pictures from Google, and I instantly found resemblance of the creature that I saw back then. Until recently, I had completely forgot about this event, but after reading several stories about Wendigos, my mind has once again been haunted by this event, and in a terrible way, as I realized that what I saw was most likely something far more horrible than a moose. Out of all the things I have read about Wendigos, the most terrifying thing is the people saying never to talk to it. I am just imagining in my head what could have happened if I had tried talking back to the creature when I felt it was speaking to me. Alright, so some people ask me to share more about the events that happened when I was visiting my grandparents' cabin. I have not been there since then, but my grandmother and her new husband stay there every summer. Do take note that it was about 6 years ago since the moose incident. For those who don't know about the first part, the cabin is located in a very forest area in South Sweden, on a pretty large island which contains only 2 cabins, separated by a pretty dense forest. Through the magic of Facebook, I contacted my grandma. We don't know each other all too well anymore, so I didn't really feel comfortable calling her. I told her about the moose-like creature and how my brother and I both saw it. She then proceeded by typing for nearly 15 minutes, and I waited patiently. Her reply was a full story of her own encounter, with what she said she had hoped was just a weird, disfigured moose. Her writing was in Swedish, so I will do my best to translate it. About 20 years ago, I was staying at the cabin by myself. Your grandpa was working at the time, so I was alone for the whole week. One night, when I was sleeping, I woke up with an uneasy feeling. I wasn't sure why, but I just knew something was wrong. I had this feeling that somebody was watching me. My first thought was to fall back asleep, and so I did. I woke up in what I believe was about an hour, and this time, I was sure something wasn't as it should be. I felt the same feeling that somebody was watching me, and I could hear something moving outside. I grab a bedside candle and light it. As I get out of bed, I choose not to pull the curtains, as I have this terrifying feeling that someone will be staring right at me. By now, I'm pretty much convinced that someone is trying to rob me. I was sleeping in a room at the back of the cabin, and so I walk up to the front and look out by the porch but see nothing. There are no neighbors nearby, and I can't call the police as I have no phone. I decide to go back to bed and try to sleep the fear away, and so I do. I lay there for at least an hour without falling asleep, and even though the sound is gone, the unpleasant feeling has stuck around. At the backside of the cabin, right outside of my window, was an older cabin which we used before this one was built. The place was creepy, and we eventually decided to burn it down some years later. Anyways, I hear something bumping around outside of it, and I realize that I am actually going to have to look out the window. I get out of bed, light the candle again, and go pull the curtains. The uneasy feeling is still there, and I have the strongest feeling that something is going to be staring right back at me. I pull the curtains, and for a second, I'm in complete fear. I see something staring back at me, but it's no robber. It's not a person. It was a moose. I expected to be relieved to find that it was nothing but a harmless animal, but that is far from what it was. After some seconds, I calmed down, and the panic faded a bit. This thing was still staring at me, but it was for sure not a normal moose. I took some seconds to investigate it. For a first, it was not standing on 4 legs. It was bending, as if the upper front legs were just barely floating above the ground. It was also much more slim than all the others that I have seen, and it had this sort of disturbing twist in the body. The antlers just looked flat out terrifying. Naturally, it doesn't say anything, but I had this very strong feeling that it wanted me to come out. It wanted me to let it help me, even though I felt that's what it wanted me to hear. I just knew that this thing had bad intentions. I faint within a few seconds and wake up at morning and let out a scream of panic. The creature is gone, and I'm trying to figure out if I was dreaming or not. To this day, I'm not sure if this actually happened or if I was just dreaming. But now that I know you saw the same thing, I know it was real. My grandma suggested that I should tell my brother that I spoke to her about it, and I am seriously considering doing so. I mean, this for sure confirms that what we saw was not a normal animal. I had some thoughts thinking that it might just have been a handicapped or disfigured moose, but by the way that my grandma said it tried to communicate with her and convince her, you knew it was the same thing that my brother and I encountered, as it too tried to talk to us. Apparently, she had already told the story to my mom and to my grandpa, but they just brushed it off and said it was either an injured moose or she was dreaming. Hearing about this story just made me all the more scared, but at the same time curious about what exactly the creature was, and also what its purpose was. Was it trying to draw us into the forest? Was it actually trying to help us with something? Or did this animal want help? Hopefully, I will get more clarification the more that I talk to people about it. I ended up sending some pictures of Wendigo and skinwalkers to her, and she definitely saw some comparisons between them and the moose-like thing. This definitely sent shivers down my spine. So to all the people reading this, if you ever encounter a weird-looking creature, deer, moose, or anything with antlers, do not speak with it, or even acknowledge their presence. That's exactly what they want. I experienced something in the summer of 2013 that still haunts me to this day, and continues to make me question everything. My girlfriend Anna and I had decided to go camping as a last farewell to summer and to get some alone time. She would be going back to school pretty soon, and I wouldn't be seeing her as often. We had been together for just over 2 years, and I was completely head over heels for her. I was even thinking about popping the question. So on a weekend in early August, I packed up my camping gear and drove 45 minutes away to the park that we would always visit. It was a nice park. It had a lot of trees and wildlife, along with a small creek running through it. We knew the area well since my friends and family had camped there since we were kids. I ended up sending a text message to Anna after parking my car, letting her know that I had made it and I had set up camp in our favorite spot. You see, Anna had been caring for her sick grandmother all summer, and her sister had finally agreed to watch her so that she could get away for the weekend, but she had to wait for her sister to get off work, around 5 p.m. that is. To save time, I had volunteered to go ahead and set up. I went up the trail a bit until I found the spot we always camped at. It was nice and level and was right beside the creek. I immediately started setting up the tent. I wanted to get everything done so Anna didn't have to help. About 40 minutes later, I had the tent set up, our camping gear set out, and our sleeping bags unrolled. Everything was organized and cozy. I was in the middle of starting a fire when I got a notification on my phone. It was a text message from Anna. "I have something to tell you," it read.
Just as I started to text her back, I heard footsteps coming down the path. My body tensed up a bit, because you never know what kind of people you'll run into in these woods. We had on a number of occasions met with a few drunks and the occasional rowdy teenager, but I soon relaxed as I saw Anna step out from behind the trees with a big grin on her face. I walked up and hugged her, scooping her off the ground a bit to make her giggle. I sat her back down and asked her what she had wanted to tell me. "I love you," was the reply that I got as she planted a kiss on my cheek. Her voice, though, sounded a bit different and her lips were cold. I asked if she was feeling okay, and she brushed off the question and went to check out the camp. I gave her a brief tour before I went to go cook dinner. I made us each one of those pre-packaged camping meals that you add hot water to. We had pasta, and I opened the bottle of red wine I had brought. We sat around the fire eating. I tried my best to entertain her with some funny stories. The sun was going down, and I was having a great time. I watched the shadows dance off of her and the surrounding trees, and listened to the motion of the nearby creek. The daylight was almost gone when she said she was cold. I told her she could go into the tent to warm up while I cleaned up from dinner. She made her way to the tent, but not before giving me a smile and another cold kiss. I was starting to get worried about her. I wondered if she was getting sick, but I didn't want to nag her, so I didn't say anything. I busied myself with cleaning up after dinner, and it was there that I found Anna's plate of food that she had set off to the side on the ground. She hadn't ate a single thing. I also found her glass of wine nearby, tipped over into the grass. This wasn't like her at all. That girl liked her food and the wine was her favorite. At this point, I was more than just a little worried. So I headed into the tent to ask her if she was feeling sick, and I suggested that we pack up and get a motel for the night. But when I opened the tent and crawled in, I found her sound asleep in her sleeping bag. I contemplated waking her up so we could leave, but she looked so relaxed that I decided against it. I went back outside and finished cleaning up camp and putting out the fire before I lay down next to her in my own sleeping bag. I had a bit too much wine, and I fell asleep quickly. The morning came and it quickly filled the tent with a soft glow as I listened to the birds singing outside. Anna was still sound asleep, so I decided to get up and start breakfast. 15 minutes later, I was admiring the meal that I had made. Well, as much as you can admire. Slightly runny scrambled eggs that came from a pouch. I peeked my head back into the tent to tell Anna that breakfast was ready, but that's when things got even stranger. Anna wasn't there. I didn't think it was likely that she could have left the tent without me seeing her, but maybe she had done so when my back was turned. I waited for a bit, figuring that she stepped out when, quote-unquote, nature called, but 15 minutes passed, and I was starting to get worried. I walked the edge of our campsite and called for her, but there was no response. I walked to the trail and called out her name as I walked up and down the path each way. Still, nothing. I went back to the campsite and checked the tent, but it was still empty. I looked around her belongings, but it was then that I realized that she hadn't brought anything. I couldn't even remember her checking her phone last night, which is something that she was in the habit of doing while she was out in case her grandma needed her. That's when I grabbed my phone and decided to text her. I didn't have any signal, so I walked back up the trail to my truck where I knew the signal was good. That's when the text messages started flooding my screen. All of them from Anna. My hands began to shake as I started reading. I have something to tell you. It's bad news. Grandma just passed away. Are you there? Can you meet me at Grandma's house? I can't go camping tonight. I'm sorry. We can reschedule. Where are you? Fine. I'll be at my sister's house for the night. Call me. My hand started to shake so violently that I dropped my phone. My mind raced so fast that I had to fight to not pass out. I ran back to the campsite and searched everywhere, but there was no evidence of Anna or anyone else. I checked the tent to look at her sleeping bag that had clearly been used last night. I even checked the garbage bag to confirm that there were 2 plates from dinner last night, one with food still on it. I ran back to the truck and sent Anna a text message because I didn't trust my voice not to tremble. I told her I got very sick last night and couldn't text her back. I apologized and offered my condolences about the passing of her grandma. She texted me back letting me know she was okay and that I would see her later that day. I walked back to camp in a daze. My mind seemed to want to shut down. It couldn't process what happened. At first I thought I was going crazy. I thought I had a breakdown and imagined it all. But the sleeping bag and the dinner that she didn't eat told me differently. Who or what kept me company last night? Who or what could look just like Anna, but not be Anna? Had it been a ghost? Maybe a shapeshifter? Or was all of this just some kind of sick joke? I packed up camp with difficulty. My stomach was in knots and my muscles were weak. I felt like I was going to get sick at any moment. I made it home and sent a text message to Anna. I told her I was still sick and didn't want to make her sick. The next time I saw Anna was on the day of her grandma's funeral, where I easily passed off my anxiety about the whole ordeal as grief and sympathy. As I said in the beginning, I never told anyone this story. Me and Anna are now married, and I still haven't even told her. We don't go camping in those woods anymore. We have found a much nicer, and hopefully, safer spot to camp. I look back and remember that night quite often. I replay all the scenes in my head, trying to find anything that will lead me to an explanation, but I haven't figured out anything. I do, however, know one thing. I spent the night with someone or something, and it wasn't my girlfriend.